All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بك من شر أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربي زدني علما. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, and assalamu alaikum, brother Islam. Welcome
وعليكم
back.
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Welcome back. It's been a while. Number 12 took a while to get started.
Yeah, it's been some time, but glad to be back.
Yes, inshallah, we'll continue this. The obviously consistency is the best thing that we could do, and we'll try and be consistent as much as possible, inshallah. And as usual, what we have today, we're tackling atheism. MashaAllah, a lot of the other brothers have already worked on some of the other challenges that are brought up against Islam, like Christianity, like Hinduism, and other matters. But obviously, atheism is, and ilhad, as we say in Urdu, agnosticism, just deism, all of these are matters which definitely need to be addressed. And this is where we want to take the opportunity and work with some of the most uh, controversial arguments, which when you start analyzing them, you realize there's hardly anything of substance in those arguments. And atheism is one of them, right? It's something which has become very prominent in the last 15, 20 years, uh, but it does not hold any substance to it, as we just mentioned. Brother Islam, you used to be an atheist.
Yeah, I did. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I was raised initially in a Christian school, but my father was, my adopted dad was very atheist, and he sort of taught me that religion was this evil in the world and the root of wrong think and all this kind of stuff. So I was raised not just atheist, but very anti-theist and very
Mhm.
anti-religious. And just to recap, yeah, it wasn't until I went to graduate in theoretical physics at um, where I met my match in Islam.
Yeah. And how do you think now that we've gone past it, this idea that theism is sort of juxtaposed as the opposite of the scientific and technological progress? That this concept that the only way to progress in science and technology is if you let go of your theism, if you let go of uh, a concept of God. That's the only way to progress in life.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a big question because I mean, there's the European colonialist story of
Mhm.
how maths and physics came to be dominant and primarily methodological naturalist, which supports sort of naturalism as being a sufficient foundation for understanding reality. But that's pretty much like learning about the Roman Empire only from the writings of the emperor's scribes, um, in terms of accuracy of the actual understanding what went on. Um, Historically, actually, the Tawheed, the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was a major catalyst in the Islamic era, being able to integrate different areas of or knowledge from all over the place and put together this synthesis, the likes of which had never been seen before. And it was this synthesis being passed on to the Europeans that allowed them the dawn of their well, the Renaissance, and then moving forward, where they first started to really get to grips with maths and geometry. Now, they had this superiority complex whereby as soon as they've understood something, they must be the first to understand it. You know, they also wanted to, um, yeah, the Muslims were their mortal enemies. So they wanted to refound their newly established nations, which are really just attempts to recreate a tribe. Um, and they wanted to establish them based on some long-standing history. So they tried to make up this story that the Greeks were the origin of all this stuff, and that, you know, the Arabs quietly, if mentioned at all, were just sort of custodians of this knowledge. And then it was never really understood until the Europeans got hold of it, and suddenly there was a massive explosion in development. That's basically the story which is told. And so from this framework, um, it will then start to look, well, hang on a minute, dropping the various constrained assumptions of the various churches, because various churches you see at the time, they had adopted Aristotelian physics, but they hadn't really developed it or been able to understand it to the depth that the Arabs did, and any advancements they made were taken from the Arabs. So the church doctrines were entwined with this very old sort of metaphysics and this very old ontologies and so on, and tried to wrestle with unifying it with the Trinity and all this other kind of stuff. So breaking away from the church and the church's view of what maths and geometry was doing was very beneficial, because it was like freeing artificial chains. But that's not actually how this stuff got developed. This stuff got developed on the Islamic perspective. And from that perspective, it was an important unifying principle and foundation. And breaking away from the church in any way, if anything, just freed people up to be able to see better the Islamic perspective. So when you trace the real history, and we'll go into an example of this when we look at William Lane Craig versus Graham Oppy on Wigner's paper. The European story was where they discovered these new things that no one else had been able to do before, from negative numbers through to complex numbers and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is that this stuff was already done, dealt with, understood, just in a different form that the Europeans didn't necessarily recognize. So in a nutshell, the Europeans deluded themselves. What they were really doing is taking the answers to a bunch of difficult puzzles and reverse engineering them. And then when they found all these connections, they went, wow, this is amazing. And so it started to seem very miraculous. Magic, complex numbers are often taught using the language of magic, the magic of complex numbers. Isn't this amazing? This stuff happens. Whereas the perspective from the original geometers who came up with all this algebra and geometry connections to algebra, in particular, Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Khayyam, they had a clear idea of what number and geometry was and how they were related. And to them, the European discoveries wouldn't have seemed amazing, mystical, and it would have been very remarkably obvious. They would sort of, in many cases, just give them a slow clap and be like, yeah, you've started understanding a bit about geometry.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's interesting because of how they've tried to remove the Islamic contributions um, throughout this Renaissance, and it's if you think about it, it's something which is happening still today, and
Mm,
we have one of the champions of the Christian movement who takes something which was built by Muslims, and he has, in a way, in more recent times, pretty much rebranded it as his own or a Christian argument against atheism, against this movement which we've seen recently, right? And I'm talking obviously about Dr. William Lane Craig,
mhm,
where that's who we're going to be reviewing. I think he's an interesting example of very interesting microcosm of everything that has been wrong throughout this whole period of Renaissance. Uh, and his he carries the arrogance of the uh, Christian or the European Christianity in spearheading human thoughts in this century.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I don't think that's so much in his nature. Like, he
Hmm.
doesn't seem to want to be this arrogant guy at all. And I think if it were exposed to him and he could see that, relative to a deeper and more informed perspective with the Islamic contributions, sort of, because he's been so heavily weighted learning the European perspective. I think if he understood the Islamic perspective better, then it would be revealed that there is intrinsic arrogances in the views that he's adopting.
Hmm.
But I don't think he can see them as he is. I know when I was an atheist, I made loads of outrageously arrogant claims, not thinking they were arrogant at all, thinking I was literally just stating the obvious, you see. So
Yeah.
I kind of know what it's like to be on that side. It's interesting because Oppie and Lane Craig are two of my sort of favorite philosophers on theology.
Hmm.
But I disagree with them both. And ironically, I agree with Oppie more often than I agree with Lane Craig.
That's
Um,
interesting.
but nevertheless, I think they're a really good pair to look at to see how the Islamic perspective solves the problem that exists in the dialogue between them. And I feel that with both of them, if they were to understand the Islamic perspective properly, they would adopt it. I think it's in line with the more core principles by which they sort of go about their epistemology. Um, and again, what they're saying, I think, makes a lot of sense if the European narrative on how number and geometry and the physical world relates to each other is
Hmm.
gospel. But if you see it for the ruse that it was, and you see it for its geopolitical and other kind of origins, um, then uh, then I think they would they would realize that their foundations are built on sand, because Oppie, for example, thinks of the laws as being something that somehow pre-exists or coexists with matter. I mean, it has to kind of pre-exist if it creates the matter when he relies on it to solve the Kalam argument.
Hmm.
So he then takes this kind of Platonist view, in a sense, not necessarily wanting to. Um, but this idea of that being what the physical laws are really starts with people trying to understand Newton. And Newton essentially just imported two of the main sort of elements of geometry and physics as Avicenna, as he knew him, or Ibn Sina, as we know him.
Hmm.
Um, you know, essentially, uh, when they started finding laws, they didn't really know what they were finding. Laws is a really bad name. What they found is patterns. And as soon as you use the word patterns, and you realize that math is a language to be able to describe these patterns, essentially brain patterns,
Hmm.
then laws don't become mysterious at all. It's just we have this pattern. But the Europeans were like, that somehow these laws are their own things with their own sort of reality that sort of predates or pre-exists our ability to then find the structures,
Hmm.
rather than as we see it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manages things directly, actively with his qadar all the time. And because of his names and attributes, we know that we can expect a lot of regularity in there because, he's optimum in the way he does things, because he doesn't change. He doesn't need to change his plan because his plan was always perfect in the first place.
Hmm.
Uh, so the more we're able to try and sort of look at patterns and go deeper, then we'll find more regularity and order. But there'll always be exceptions to those as well. Um, and for example, what we expect to see in Yom Al Qayyam is going to be quite different from normal physics. But if you could work for long enough and see the patterns in that, then you'd develop a new kind of physics. So yeah, I think anyway, I'm going a little bit off tangent here, but
Mhm.
essentially what laws are is really regular patterns that have some domain of applicability. And there's a deep connection between what the domain of applicability is and what the laws are. Um, so with it being understood, the thing is, if you try and take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of the picture and say laws are just patterns, then you have this lack of well-foundedness. You have the circularity at the beginning where it's like, does the matter come first or the laws come
Mhm.
first? And that becomes like a free choice.
I would
Uh,
say it's the same as looking at a three-dimensional thing in a two-dimensional sense only, and trying to explain, or let's say you look at the shadow and basically say from the shadow that this is what the whole thing is supposed to be.
I think there's a sense in which that's going on for sure, because um, we have eyes that only see a certain amount of information
Hmm.
that comes in. We
Yeah.
have certain constraints on being human, and we're interacting with a constrained medium, the voice, with other humans. You can't
Yeah.
completely transmit your exact thoughts and feelings to another human. You have this very high speed interlinked network of computing nodes in your brain, but a very, very low speed and low fidelity link in language between two people. So, these things sort of put constraints on what people can share, and if their reality is validated by other people's agreeing or disagreeing or failure to test your ideas or
Hmm.
whatever, then what you can communicate becomes a critical factor in what ends up becoming your perceived laws, your perceived
Mm.
foundations
Yeah.
even.
So let's start. I think we've got a decent audience right now. I'll start with the video. Um, I'll start at 1.25, but I know both of these people speak pretty slowly. So if we can try, I'll actually start with
Start with
1.5.
1.25.
Yeah, I'll start 1.25 and we'll see how it goes. The other thing I would say, do you want to bring people up during the video, or do we wait? Because
Yeah, I think we'll let people come up and say if they want to wave and hello. I think we should get a good, at least the first sort of half an hour ish minus the initial introductions, just because they don't get to God until over just over half an hour in.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
so, but if people can sort of say in the chat if they want to add comments to the video and the discussion on the video specifically,
Mhm.
or if they want to come with something more general or a more general kind of argument.
Yeah.
In which
That's
case, we'd wait until we've made some progress on the video.
yeah. And this video is a discussion between Dr. Graham Oppy and Dr. William Lane Craig. We've talked a bit about Dr. William Lane Craig, and I think even in the Muslim world, he's pretty much well known due to his um, very public debates with some of the most prominent atheists in the last, and with Muslims as well, in the last 20, 30, actually 35 plus years, I would say now. So, can you speak a bit about Dr. Graham Oppy, who he is, and um, just so people know who that this is not just a random guy having a
Yeah,
conversation with.
I've got. I was just looking. I've got a number of his books dotted about here. I can sort of show some of them
Hmm.
that I think are interesting or worth a read. I think a lot of atheists should read it. Should read his work because he's much more philosophically advanced than the vast majority of atheists. Certainly, most of the pundit atheists that you see. Um, he
Obviously, Dawkins included.
Oh yeah, Dawkins is a sort of shadow next to Oppie in terms of
Hmm.
intellectual prowess, let alone in terms of his actual background knowledge, especially understanding of philosophy. I mean, Dawkins's understanding of philosophy is so poor he doesn't understand that he's doing philosophy, and he thinks philosophy is stupid. But his entire foundation rests on a philosophical position. But
Yeah.
he doesn't know enough about philosophy to know that he conflates it with science. So it's kind of funny in a way. It's he's he's one step better than Aaron Ra, which
Hmm.
is not saying an awful lot.
Yeah.
Um, whereas Oppie is he got a background in maths and physics, although it was quite a while ago. I don't think he's kept up that much with the um, at least the maths behind the physics, although I think he reads the popular stuff. Um, so he does have a decent background. He knows what he's talking about when he mentions science stuff, which is a good start, particularly when he's talking about maths and physics. However, he doesn't necessarily have this non-European historical view. Um, he he has that background. He also has very broadly studied all religions. I mean, near enough all. He's got an amazing sort of breadth of knowledge. I think one of the problems, though, is that when you look at his attempts to pin down deity or his analysis of what religion is, um, it betrays that it takes an a priori Enlightenment perspective, which goes hand in hand with the contemporary colonial perspectives by which all of this information about other belief systems and other cultures was extracted and structured. And I think that's really his Achilles heel. Because if I look at his books, I think he's essentially disproved lots of false gods. Great, round of applause. I agree.
Mhm.
But he's never really been able to tackle pure monotheism. I don't see any evidence that he understands
Yeah.
Tawheed.
I don't
And I
think
think
he's had interactions with Muslim philosophers at all.
yeah, I think it's too easy to look at it as being a later variation of the Judeo-Christian tradition, and so it's like a lot of people. If you go superficially, then you can just transport one concept of God on top of the other, and that'll do. Or you
Mhm.
can say, so in the in the philosophical tradition he comes from, it's perfectly acceptable to say, okay, all things with quality X and quality Y, or attribute X and attribute Y, and let's just reason based on those, ignore all other attributes.
Mhm.
Whereas and so with that, they can create this generic theism model, which is actually in every sense a straw man because it only takes some of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and discounts other attributes.
Mhm.
Um, and so, that it's a weak or a false rendition of it. Um, and in each case where those arguments appear to stand based on this hobbled version, if you were to take the full range of names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the understanding in the Quran, then those arguments no longer hold. And so this is something that I think is really Oppie's great weakness, is his lack of understanding of Islam, the Islamic position, and of how pure monotheism is very different from the forms of monotheism that he's used to.
Mhm. All right, let's start with this. I think we've.
Oh, just one thing about him. So he is generally regarded and accepted as being one guy I know described him as a kingpin of atheism or atheist
Mm,
philosophy.
okay.
He's very, very well regarded. He's better structured and clearer with what he's saying. He's willing to admit that he has certain articles of faith, although obviously he doesn't like that language. No one, none of them do. He would call them brute contingencies, or
Mm,
something of that nature, or brute assertions, and that's really one of the things that makes him more interesting, because most atheists are simply unable to see and admit where they've made assumptions and then adjusted things to fit their assumptions.
yeah.
Um, so, having not recognized that, they don't permit the theist to do that. Whereas Oppie recognizes it and permits a theist to do that. But Oppie says, in the case of theism, you have to posit one more thing. And that's very interesting because that's true for the European perspectives on theism. It's not true for the Islamic perspective. It's the other way around.
All right, let's start with this. Let me know if you hear when I start playing this. I'm skip the introduction by uh, this guy.
Yeah.
um, don't know his name. don't care. But let's see.
Cameron Bertuzzi.
And we talked about
Can
this
you
too.
hear?
I was listening to your discussion with Daniel Kane on unbelievable. And one of the things that I wished had happened in that discussion was to give some concrete examples of how the applicability of math to the physical universe provides evidence for God. So like, what are some concrete examples? But give the examples after you lay out the argument.
Sure. We agreed to use as a springboard for our discussion today an article published by Eugene Wigner in 1960 entitled The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Physical Sciences. Wigner was a Hungarian-born physicist and mathematician who emigrated to the United States prior to the rise of Hitler's Third Reich. And he went on to become one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, earning the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1964 for his contributions to the mathematics of quantum mechanics. And in this article, Wigner argues that the applicability of mathematics to the physical world is a mystery that cries out for some sort of explanation. Now, what do we mean by applicability of mathematics? Applicability has to do with mathematics' reliability or utility in successfully navigating the physical world. Physicists find that the laws of nature can be expressed as mathematical equations which describe physical phenomena to an astonishing degree of accuracy. And so Wigner's main point in this article was, and I quote, mathematical concepts turn up in entirely unexpected connections in physics and often permit an unexpectedly close and accurate description of the phenomena in these connections. So, with respect to mathematics' role in physics, Wigner notes that mathematics plays an important and what he called sovereign role in physics, which enables us to formulate the laws of nature in the language of mathematics in order for them to then be an apt object for the use of applied mathematics. And Wigner argues that the mathematical formulation of the physicist's often crude experience leads in an uncanny number of cases to an amazingly accurate description in a large class of phenomena. And he gives three examples in support. The first example is Newton's second law of motion, F equals ma, where F is the force of an object, m is the mass of the object, and a is the acceleration of the object. Second example is the use of so-called matrix mechanics in the formulation of ordinary elementary quantum mechanics. And his third example is quantum electrodynamics, which is a theory which unites quantum mechanics with special relativity in order to describe electromagnetism. And these examples, which grow in complexity as you go through them, and which he says could be multiplied almost indefinitely, illustrate the appropriateness and the almost fantastic accuracy of the mathematical formulation of the laws of nature. At this point, Wigner then muses, it is difficult to avoid the impression that a miracle confronts us here. He thinks that the success of mathematics in physical theories is truly surprising. And he gives one reason for that, and then I would like to add one. His reason is the a priori nature of mathematical theorizing. Wigner stresses the a priori nature of mathematical inquiry, especially the mathematics that's so valuable in physics. I quote, whereas it is unquestionably true that the concepts of elementary mathematics, and particularly elementary geometry, were formulated to describe entities which are directly suggested by the actual world, the same does not seem to be true of the more advanced concepts, in particular, the concepts which play such an important role in physics. Most more advanced mathematical concepts, such as complex numbers, algebras, linear operators, Borel sets, and this list could be continued almost indefinitely, were so devised that they are apt subjects on which the mathematician can demonstrate his ingenuity and sense of formal beauty. And Wigner finds a particularly striking example in complex numbers. These are numbers which are multiples of the square root of -1. He says, and I quote, certainly nothing in our experience suggests the introduction of these quantities. Indeed, if a mathematician is asked to justify his interest in complex numbers, he will point with some indignation to the many beautiful theorems in the theory of equations, of power series, and of analytic functions in general, which owe their origin to the introduction of complex numbers. The mathematician is not willing to give up his interest in these most beautiful accomplishments of his genius.
All right, let's have a bit of a pause there,
And
because there's a lot to unpack, and I think there he really lays down, perhaps unwittingly, exactly what I called out was going to be this ongoing problem. I think a few things I noted to respond to. So for him, the reliability or utility of math is astonishing, or the accuracy is astonishing. Why do these crude ideas, when turned into mathematics, give these accurate results? Well, I'm going to connect this with what he says later about sort of the basic maths versus the more advanced maths. The basic stuff being the maths that originally came from geometric analysis, like proportions. If things are in proportion to each other, then you have multiplication, you have squares of things. If you have a continued proportion of things, then x is to x squared, as x squared is to x cubed, as x cubed is to x to the 4. So you have all the powers that you see in polynomials, come from continued proportions in geometry and all this sort of stuff. So this was the foundation of maths and geometry from sort of roughly the 16th century, late 16th century, on to around the late 1800s. And it was around then that formalism came in, which was this new movement. So when he mentions that mathematics has this a priori nature of mathematical reasoning, that is literally just an ideological dogma born of the formalist period. It was in no sense was it ever a priori before. It was very clearly derived from connection to reality. People didn't necessarily understand to quite what a degree counting, for example, is actually a complex process in the brain. Not all humans actually count. There's the Piraha people who you try to teach them counting and they think it's stupid. They call it wrong-headed, and they apparently feel they have a superior way of deconstructing and analyzing the world. So that's an interesting example there. But when you count, you really identify, are things similar or different enough and distinct from one another to be counted? If two balls were the same color and shape and size, and also co-located exactly in the same position, you wouldn't have two balls anymore, you'd have one ball. So there has to be at least some difference between them. And then, are they same enough to be counted in the count? Are you counting things that are balls, or are you counting things that are red balls, and so on and so forth? So there's a bit to sort of counting, but counting was numbers. It was what's called discrete. It's these things are separable, and there's a some kind of essentially algorithmic process to go through counting. And then having numbers like 2, 3, 4, 5 was just shorthand for having a bunch of ticks or dashes to represent a separate thing. So this is the number side, and then on the geometry side you have these proportions and these other kind of relationships. This is where the idea of square roots comes from in the first place, is the length of the diagonal across a square. Be more accurate, that the length is related to the length of diagonal across the square, and that if you square that, you get something equal to the opposite squares, Pythagoras theorem. Obviously, you have, if the square is area a squared, then it has length a. So anyway, what I'm saying is essentially all of the later maths that was developed by formalists, what the formalists did was they started saying, okay, we are going to search for beautiful theorems, things that add up in this certain aesthetic way. And they were trying to put things in a way that was for them more general. So without making reference a priori to the initial ideas that they were trying to model or mimic. Classic example is in Russell and Whitehead's Principia Mathematica, where they spent a good couple of hundred pages trying to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. because they wanted to do that independently of the prior counting system. This whole idea that mathematics is a priori was literally born of this formalist ideology and agenda. It was just literally that. There's no reason for it. There's no rationality that shows that maths is a priori. It was literally just this new belief system, or this new wave of how to do maths. So
I want to sort of just pause for a moment and just ask you to explain the term a priori.
Oh, yeah. A priori, meaning that it precedes or is independent of. So a posteriori is something that's after the fact. A priori is something that's before the fact. So when he's saying that mathematical reasoning is a priori, he's saying that you could sit down and just do the mathematical reasoning, and then the output of that mathematics then applies to reality. And so it was because of the formalist tradition which ended up taking over most of modern mathematics. And indeed, the stuff he calls modern mathematics, it all comes from that Hilbert school of formalism. It's in that school, according to a purely ideological belief, which is literally the opposite to historical reality. They said mathematics is a priori, and people have just run with it largely ever since. But the fact is, it's not a priori. The fact is, it's all developed from operations on reality, which essentially amounts to using the various faculties of our mind, which are able to find reusable and transmissible patterns.
So the reason why I asked for this is because when we're talking about mathematics, right? Mathematics essentially is a language explaining the patterns in our reality, right? It's a way for human beings to sort of conceptualize or maybe to articulate what they observe.
So that's applied mathematics. I would say that's too strict because that's specifically applied. I would say that the patterns in mathematics are actually patterns in human thinking. So if I were to have some thoughts and say, and in this thoughts, A follows B follows C follows D, but when I try and write that down and show it to you, nothing follows at all. Well, do we have different sort of logic, different beliefs, or have we understood A, B, C, and D differently, or why the connectors between them should exist differently, and so on? And what maths actually does, or let's be more specific, what maths built on logic really does is preserves belief. So when you say something is true or is proven in maths, what you're really saying is within this formalism, so given these definitions of these axioms and these components and all the ways you can provide them, then it is true that this statement follows. So the truth is contingent upon accepting the propositions. And so really what you're doing is not preserving truth when you're doing logic and maths built on logic, but you're actually preserving belief. Because if you do not take one of those axioms, or you do not believe one of those axioms applies, then the rest of it fails to follow. So the word truth shifted its meaning quite dramatically in the formalist period. It used to mean that something actually connected with reality, how reality actually was, because maths was always integrated with reality from the outset. The formalists tore them asunder and tried to rip them apart. And from that perspective, it then seems amazing when they come back together.
Okay. All right. There were a few concepts that he gave examples of. Newton's second law. I think a lot of people would understand those very simply. F is equal to ma, mass into acceleration.
Yeah, which is false, by the way. That's not actually Newton's second law. That is only under the constraint where mass is constant.
Mass is constant.
Because actually F is dp dt, where p is momentum. Now, this is really important. the founding concept of Newton's laws, three laws, really was momentum. They can all three laws can just come from different statements about momentum. First law, that an object will stay in the same path if there's no forces acting on it. It's just saying momentum is conserved, or rather, you put momentum, or as Ibn Sina put it, you put momentum, or he called it mail, into a body, and it remains there until something affects it or takes it away. And the second law is actually force is the rate of change of momentum. Well, this is just another way of saying what Ibn Sina was saying, where if momentum changes, something is communicating that change of momentum to it. And it's just putting it in this analytical language, which is this. Actually, Newton used fluxions rather than the modern differentials, which are subtly different. So really, the concept of male is what gives you those laws, and they each derive from either male or the way the Arabs use geometry. Because Arabs, and when I say Arab, I mean Arab speakers, which includes the Persians and so on, the whole Islamic Empire. They thought of geometry as this dynamic thing, a dynamic process. They often thought of points moving under constraints as generating lines, lines moving under constraints as generating surfaces, and so on. And it's very clear. I've got some books on Ibn Sina where you can clearly see he uses directed lines versus undirected lines and so on. They had quite a sophisticated
And
view.
how many years prior to Newton had Ibn Sina come up with these concepts?
I think it was 900 years. I think 800 years, 900 years, roughly, something like that.
All right.
So yeah, significant. But it also, as he would have known it, Avicenna, because it's one of these classic Latinizations. It's very likely Newton had it on his bookshelf. He certainly would have access to it at the university. And really, what I was saying about this geometry being generated by motions, if I just finish that bit off, it makes a lot of sense why I sort of went into it, because Newton's insight really was that geometry was generated by motions, and he put that into this algebraic language. And the thing about algebra is people can then use an entirely different mental function. Instead of using this mostly geometric functions in the brain, there's a whole different area to do with linguistics, and algebra really lets you use this linguistic area. So people could learn the algebraic method and without even being able to visualize anything, get the answers out of the end. And so I think this is one of the reasons why Newton's ideas really sort of took off, and people started to be able to see geometry as this more dynamic thing. And his third law really encapsulates this use of what we now think of as vectors. The Arabs had them the whole time, but it took a good few hundred years for Europe to really absorb and understand directed magnitude as different from a distance, a general magnitude. And so that was, the Newton's law stuff was very good to raise that. I think the other two examples that he brought up was matrix mechanics. And quantum electrodynamics.
Exactly.
Matrices have been around since a very long time, because all they really are is a way of taking a linear equation and putting a bunch of them together in one object. So that when you're doing operations on it, it's like you're doing a bunch of operations on the underlying equations they represent. But thinking of matrices as being their own objects that are satisfying different kind of algebraic rules was all the playhouse of this formalist thing. So how to use matrices didn't really how to use them as a thinking tool in their own right, rather as something used to grind through calculations, was very much sort of developed on this formalist school. And although he called it matrix mechanics, Schrödinger discovered approximately the same time the equivalent in wave mechanics. So wave mechanics is equivalent to matrix mechanics, and that used mostly classical ideas. But there's a bit of a complication there to do with Hilbert space versus Fourier transforms that we won't go into because it get too technical, I think, for the audience. And the other one was quantum electrodynamics.
I actually want you to get technical on this matter.
Okay, we can. Let's swing back to it. Let's swing back to it. I might need to pull up a virtual whiteboard if we go too much further.
All right.
But yeah, in quantum electrodynamics, if really you can view it as being a completion of Maxwell's original field theory idea. And what I find really interesting about that is he represented it as being quantum mechanics sort of reconciled with special relativity. But Dirac, on the theme of this topic, the unreasonable effectiveness of maths, something they don't bring up, unfortunately, is that Dirac was literally explicitly driven by a search for mathematical beauty. And he specifically said, and this is a quote, that it was more important for equations to be beautiful than to be correct. Which flies in the face of a lot of stuff that both Craig and Oppie discussed. And if either of them knew that, I don't think they would be making the same arguments they made, especially using QED. And this is, I think, quite profound because if the equations are relatively simple, it means the ideas and the relationships encoded in them are relatively simple, which means the brain can use them better. So there is very good practical reasons to be looking for the more elegant or more beautiful formalism. And this question of what elegance and beauty is relates back to Occam's razor. And Occam's razor has been a guiding principle, I think, precisely for this kind of reason, that the more entities you need to stick in your theory to try and match what you're trying to explain, the more likely you are to have made mistakes or induced logical errors and other kind of stuff like that. More complex, more difficult, less insight, basically. So yeah, QED really came out of trying to find a more beautiful expression for the relationship between electromagnetism and quantum theory, really. And it's because of electromagnetism that you have special relativity in the first place. The idea of length contraction and time dilation specifically comes from electromagnetic considerations. So that's sort of an important thing to note, because a lot of the quantum theory was originally developed thinking about electrical phenomenon, although some of it sort of crossover with a chemical phenomenon. And so, but the electrical phenomenon were considered in the classical electromagnetism sense, and that led to a lot of issues. And so that's why later QED, the unification of them through a beautiful mathematical, very simple, sort of elegant system of objects and equations between them became preferred. And then once they had that, they were able to explore and find more consequences than they would have been able to while things were more complicated. The simpler tool was more useful, more universal, and so could probe things that they weren't able to probe reliably through the messier formalisms.
I have an interesting, I don't know if it means anything, but fluxing must not be preserved as idle. Maximizing the destruction of any formation of idols, people can dig time via light positioning or curvature and forming equation equal to mass for Satan infrastructure.
Okay,
One of the
maybe, I guess let's see what can be unpacked here. I think if this chap or chapess wants to hop on and discuss, that might be better. Fluxing, I don't know if that's fluxing or fluxions is what he's talking about. I mean, I agree that nothing should be preserved as an idol, and maximizing the destruction of idols is a good thing. I mean, that I can see as being relevant because we need to understand what idols are and what deities are in the broad sense, including false deities. And I think this is really key, because I mean, this was one of the key things for me of coming out of atheism, was when I was atheist, I thought I had no gods. But when I understood what a god actually was, and that the Enlightenment redefinition of deity no more changes the nature of deity than calling a cat a dog turns it into a dog. So once you understand what deity really is, then later the halal becomes this crucial principle, which is like a much higher, more effective version of Occam's razor in a way, which is eliminate all of the beliefs in all founding entities or elements except for the one. There is only one. And this comes back to, you know, a deity really was something that was an independent agent of some kind. And that's sort of actually quite a deep definition, if you like, of deity, of the old concept in modern terms. So from that perspective, then, yeah, removing shirk essentially leads to deeper and deeper understanding. And that is, I think, an excellent, excellent way to summarize the history of the development of physics and maths.
He's actually said something, fluxing as process, becoming cemented phenomenon as body.
Okay, I don't understand that.
All right, let's actually move on, because we've not gotten past the 10-minute mark, and there's so much to unpack for our people. So let's
Yes, there is. One last thing, though, just before we go, is he said nothing in our experience suggests I, the imaginary numbers. This is really important to understand, because you'll see the complex numbers come up again and again quite a few times. They are usually taught through this magic lens, because it's part of this wonderful success story of the Europeans and their intellectual superiority over the Arabs. If you were to show the development of complex numbers to the geometers of, Omar Khayyam, for example, it'd be like, yes, it's a perpendicular. At some point, when you're doing, when you're combining linear equations, multiplying them and stuff, yeah, sometimes you're going to need the length and the width. Now, in Europe, we had said it's all just length. Width is just another length. There's no difference. You could just measure it the other way around. And for them, that's all there was to it. But they didn't understand that, for the Arabs, there was a very careful distinction between distance, length, area, and volume. And area was different from volume. Length is different from area. They're different sort of continuous quantities. And for them, you cannot have a width unless you already have a length. A width is relative to a length. And same, the depth is relative to the prior existence of a width and a length. So they're not actually equivalent. They're only numerically equal when you're looking at distance across them. But they have this kind of algebra. So the Europeans had picked up the algebra developed by Al-Khwarizmi, not really realizing and understanding that it worked because of its geometric roots. And so when they started finding these sort of, as they perceived, holes in it, things that they didn't see how it related to geometry, it was actually because of the way they had conceived the number line and thought they were really clever and special with the way they use negative numbers. There's a whole nother go into.
And it's interesting how you're pointing it out, because for the Arabs, this is the fact that it's linked to geometry shows that for them this was a concept which explained reality. Whereas when we're talking about the Europeans, they've taken that link between reality, they've ignored it completely, and they've only taken the concept, just an abstract concept, and that's caused so much confusion later on.
Yeah. I mean, if they realized that a lot of what they were doing was rediscovering what had already been known and handed to them, just from a different perspective, it would have been, a really interesting story of the union of the two ways of thinking from different
Yeah.
sides, which is, Allah says he puts us in different nations so that we can get together and know one another. Would have been a beautiful example of that. But instead, it was the arrogance which kept hidden from them a lot of the actual physical reality. So a complex number from the European perspective of number, it makes sense to call it a number. From the Arab perspective, the medieval Arab perspective, the symbols are referring to geometric things. So this x plus iy is go along some length x and then go along some width y. And that is equivalent to having the line across there. This vector thinking is everywhere in ancient, in the medieval Arab mathematics, but doesn't really emerge until its first instance really is Newton, and Newton was after the discovery of complex numbers. The complex numbers were discovered through the cubic equation. This is a whole other interesting. The timing of stuff is very interesting, very fascinating. So yeah, in a nutshell, this I is just the width, and for the Arabs it was always about the math was on the plane in this case, and so the complex numbers are really the algebra of geometric objects on the plane, or geometric lines and circles, objects built up from lines and circles on the plane. So yeah, is it new to think of it as a number? Yeah, I guess so, but it's also pretty misguided, and that's why they say things like nothing in our experience suggests I. But that's crazy and complicated, because I mean, if you look,
It was
here,
discovered because of the very experience that we've had.
Yeah, I'll just quickly show here. This is interesting. So one of the books I have, a treatise on geometrical representations of square roots of negative quantities by Reverend. Reverends used to be very common in the development of mathematics, and at the formalist period, they were basically all wiped out. Reverend John Warren. John Warren was referenced by Edward Hamilton. He was mine's gone blank. By Hamilton, William Rowan Hamilton. So I'm trying to think of when he developed quaternions, and Warren here goes through and develops complex numbers, if I can show you, entirely based on geometry. The whole development of them goes from a foundational geometric perspective. This was an important book at the time, but it became kind of sidelined later on, partly because it didn't fit this magic story. But even Warren and others were fully aware that they actually had a geometric root, and there's something called the sums of squares and product of squares formula, which basically gives the rules for multiplication of complex numbers. So yeah, this is just a really good example of William Lane Craig's sort of drinking the Kool-Aid of this post-Enlightenment new twist on colonialist and formalist kind of supremacy story, and that's ultimately where they got misled. I think this you'll start to see as the conversation progresses is really a key point. That's why I've spent so long focusing on it, because if they were to understand that the mathematics and the actual reality were welded together by the Arabs, and I think the mystery that they're swimming around would basically fall away. So let's carry on a bit.
All right.
Is not willing to give up his interest in these most beautiful accomplishments of his genius. End quote. So who would have ever anticipated then the centrality and the usefulness of complex numbers in physical theory? The second reason I think it's surprising and unexpected is because of the causal impotence of mathematical objects. I would add to Wigner's point the fact that mathematical objects, even if they exist, have no causal impact upon the physical world, so that their applicability in the physical world is, I think, surprising. So the following would seem to be, I think, a suitable formulation of Wigner's argument in his paper. It consists of 4 premises. Number one, mathematical concepts arise from the aesthetic impulse in humans and have no causal connection to the physical world. Premise 2, it would be surprising to find that what arises from the aesthetic impulse in humans and has no causal connection to the physical world should be so significantly effective in physics. From those premises, it follows that it would be surprising to find that mathematical concepts should be so significantly effective in physics. The third premise states that the laws of nature can be formulated as mathematical descriptions, which are often significantly effective in physics. And then 4, therefore, it is surprising that the laws of nature can be formulated as mathematical descriptions that are often significantly effective in physics. So, given this unexpected applicability of mathematics to the physical world, it seems to me that the applicability of mathematics does cry out for some sort of explanation. And that's where Wigner's article ends. He has no explanation for the applicability of mathematics. As a naturalist, he's simply left with a mystery. He says the miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve. And that is where his article finishes.
All right, would you like to come in here, Graham?
Sure. So that's really interesting, and I.
Do you want to say anything? Yeah, I paused it because do you want to say anything? Because Craig just finished his argument.
Yeah, I'll try and be really brief because I was really long on the last one.
I think we've already covered most of what he said.
We have. So I was just going to point out basically that. So centrality and usefulness of complex numbers in physical theory. Again, surprising from the European fairy tale about all this discovery story from their sort of supremacist perspective. Mm-hmm. But again, why should geometry, I mean, we think complex numbers, why should structured reasoning based on geometrical representation of reality be central and useful to a geometric analysis of reality? That it becomes a stupid question, because we are literally using geometry in order to express the structure, and complex numbers are required to complete the connection between algebra and geometry of the plane. And there's a good reason why they're required, is because if you're going to have squares and square roots, you do actually need to go off the number line. You need to have a length together with a width, and they are not just the same thing. This was the crucial misunderstanding of the Europeans. Goes back to the way they treated and understood negative numbers. We can sort of go into that. So it only makes sense that they would be useful. It makes sense that the complex numbers would be more useful and more generally applicable than just real numbers if you understand what they are. It's only because of this sort of fanciful way that it's normally taught and the history is normally expressed, because it's exciting and intriguing and historically geopolitically useful story, that it seems weird. And so the other major point was mathematical objects having no causal influence on the physical world. Now, this is interesting, because when humans know mathematical ideas or have access to mathematical ideas, they're able to design and build things that have certainly had one hell of an impact on physical reality. We can see in the environment all around us, even if you don't believe in global warming. There's a whole load of changes in physical reality. The very fact that we're talking from other sides of the world, is something that is a causal consequence in the causal framework. So I should say, is causally connected with the mathematics being in someone's head and them using it to design and build something. But I guess what they're saying, or what they're supposed to be saying, is the mathematical objects in and of their own right without being in any way connected to reality has no causal impact on reality. Well, yeah, duh, by definition. So there's nothing really sort of intriguing there. The reason they raised it was to say, well, from their idea, math was oh yeah, Yemeni would do it. Yeah, the aesthetic impulse again was
This idea, before you finish the thought and before you move on, this idea that there's no causal impact is the same as saying that words don't have any causal impact.
yeah.
It's yeah, words do not, but if you expand your thinking process a bit, you would realize that words actually do have a major impact
Yeah, I
on
mean, well,
everything that happens in this world.
this is
Because
a perfect analogy because words unspoken don't have a major impact,
yeah,
other than perhaps on yourself. But once you start speaking and those words get repeated, yeah, they can have huge impact.
exactly. And it's like to come to a conclusion that uh, the these concepts are they don't have a causal impact. Number one, it just blows my mind sometimes when you limit your own um your own view to only those type of causal impacts or only those type of reality where unless you see A happening immediately from B, right, you would not make a link between those.
Yeah, and this isn't a misunderstanding of what they're trying to say when they're thinking this is an abstract object, it's not a real object, and so I get all that. But actually, the experimental apparatus of all kinds that they put together were put together using geometry and using these mathematical tools in the first place. So the very things we construct already have these mathematical ideas built into them. We wouldn't construct them otherwise. We wouldn't. And then that the mathematical theory becomes part of how we understand the thing we constructed, how we understand the experiment, and then how we understand the results that come out. Now, the results of one experiment then can become the inputs in another experiment. And really, you can think of engineering as you've done enough experiments to know that you put it this way, you can view any black box that an engineer might make that takes in input A and produces output B. You can view it as being an experiment where the result is very reliably determined. And you can think of the output of one experiment going into the next experiment and so on. And this sort of chaining together is really how we went from, pulleys and levers and sticks and stones all the way up to, through thermodynamic engines and, quantum, phenomena using lasers and stuff like that. It all does rely on us having cyclically used the maths-based ideas, make some physical model, think about what comes back, what's consistent, and so on, and keep iterating. So yeah, it's actually very difficult to extricate maths entirely away from the causal. And the other thing is thinking about causality between people's brains. Right? Remember what I said before about mathematical ideas needing to be reproducible. You need to be able to express them a second time, and you need to be able to transmit them to someone else. The sharing of ideas does have a causal change. And so, enough people taking on this sort of set of ideas that can become part of the way discourse is done, and the new idea could be more effective or useful. So the idea of temperature, for example, wasn't understood until thermodynamics, Industrial Revolution, and then it became eventually part of sort of normal discourse in office environments and stuff. People can say the situation's getting hot, or we need to lower the temperature in the room. and have a meaningful analogy. There's a whole new idea there that there wasn't a pre-existing good word for. But that word, its meaning, even if you don't think of it mathematically, still has these mathematical underpinnings. So if someone was to later then go and do some fancy analysis on when people feel like the temperature of the room is too hot or too cold in this abstract sense, and they find there's some mathematical structure to it, well, don't be surprised. It was baked in from the beginning, even if you didn't recognize it.
Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead. Graham Oppy is going to start getting into his understanding of this. Let's see.
Like the formulation of the argument, I tried to write it down while you were saying it. And I think that it's helpful because it points to a couple of of places where I would question what Wigner says. So the first premise was something like that mathematical concepts, at least certain advanced mathematical concepts, come from aesthetic impulse. And the idea was that the complex numbers, one of the ideas was that the complex numbers is an illustration of this. I think that that's probably not right. So I remember studying some complex analysis when I was doing my maths degree. And one of the interesting things about the complex numbers is what you can do with them. So you can start with real valued equations that you can't solve analytically using real analytic techniques. But by making a transformation into the complex plane, you can do some complex analysis, and then by purely analytic techniques, out pop some real numbered answers. So that the utility of the complex numbers, at least initially, and the reason why mathematicians were interested in them wasn't aesthetic. It was because there were practical problems that they wanted to solve. They wanted to be able to give exact solutions to these real numbered equations. And it turns out that the only way that you can do that is by taking a detour through complex analysis. I think more generally that Wigner underestimates the extent to which mathematics is about problem solving and overestimates the stuff about aesthetic impulse. I think that typically mathematicians are interested in puzzles, especially long-standing puzzles, but puzzles that they want to solve. And then they're looking around for ways to make advances. And when a long-standing puzzle does get solved, the expectation is that lots of new mathematics will follow on its train. You'll remember when Wiles proved Fermat's last theorem some time back, there was some expressions of disquiet amongst some in the mathematical community because they couldn't see that there was lots of new mathematics that was going to be coming out of it. But the general point, I think, is that Wigner is kind of talking up the wrong thing when he's talking about the reliance on aesthetic considerations, because I think that mathematics is much more about problem solving. Anyway, that's a first thought that you might like to say something about.
I think that it's certainly true that these...
Do you want to speak a bit about this? Because
okay, let's try and let's see if I just go over the same ground I've already gone over or not. Because again, like I said, this comes back to complex analysis. It's a really great example, so I'm glad they sort of go through it. Wigner, I think, correctly called out that it was developed based on aesthetic impulse. There's something. Remember, I spoke before about polynomials come from there being repeated proportions. X is proportional to x squared, as x squared is to x cubed, as x cubed is to x to the 4, and so on. Like if you have things that are in continued proportion, then you have this sort of series of powers and stuff. Well, if you can then add and combine those in all these different ways, you end up with these things called polynomials. Now, without the complex numbers, some of them are solvable and some of them are not solvable. They can all be factored. A polynomial can be factored into either linear factors or a quadratic factor. And you can, with any combination of linear and quadratic factors, you can factor a polynomial. That's important because the solutions are the roots you can read off from the factors. Okay, cool. But aesthetically, it was much nicer. And this fundamental theorem of algebra was that it can always be linearly factored. And it was this sort of, it was an aesthetic imposition from an algebraic standpoint. The reasons that justified it were really more to do with the underlying geometrical origin. Sorry, let's stop that. Sorry, I just forgot where I was for a second with that. What was I just talking about?
Aesthetically, this was
Oh, yes. The fundamental theorem of algebra was really this aesthetic thing. Although the justification for it was underlying geometric, that wasn't really understood or pushed as the main thing. The main thing was, hey,
the aesthetic of
if
it.
we don't think of cubic equations as being a bunch of separate equations like Omar al-Khayyam, and we think of them all being one equation, or all being different positive and negative numbers on this one single form of the equation, then it should have all these be solvable, and it should be solvable and factored into these linear factors like all the other things are. This was all in order to satisfy an aesthetic, and it's definitely an aesthetic. There's no doubt. It was like, it looks like it should be this way. It looks nicer. It would make other things work out nicer for us. But all of this was still abstract, very much in the abstract realm. Now, as this stuff was developed, eventually, the complex analysis that Oppie mentioned was developed by Riemann. Really, I mean, Cauchy and others sort of developed the foundation, but Riemann was the one that brought it all together into this synthesis, where you had Riemann surfaces, and it kind of brought analysis, topology, and algebra together in one thing. And that was interesting because this whole thing with complex numbers was aesthetic, largely in its pure mass development, and it wasn't really until electromagnetism that it started to application where you really couldn't do without them. And so actually, it's kind of right that it was to solve practical problems, eventually, like a lot of the later development. I won't go into too much detail, but this chap called Heaviside tried to use some dodgy methods to solve some of the actual problems, which later got developed into operational calculus. You need complex analysis to make operational calculus not dodgy. So you need it to sort of be able to do it with precision, with accuracy. And so that was really where complex numbers got baked in, if you like. So and that's when all these really powerful analytic techniques and so on were really are used and developed and understood and so on. So it wasn't developed really to solve practical problems. It was developed to solve problems of elegance and formalism and completing the picture, completing the puzzle.
Yeah.
And it later then, once they understood these ideas or had these mental tools, then they were able to see it applied to reality. Then once they could apply it to reality, then they could really understand these things, not just in a simple way, but in a much more concrete way. And then from that, there was a huge amount of development of complex analysis that happened after it. So it's the oversimplification and the stories that both of them are using is really the root problem.
Yeah. And they're sort of isolating only one viewpoint and ignoring the other. And I think it does appear that there's truth in how both of them are approaching it, but it's not the full picture that is being presented here. Right.
But again, this all crucially hangs on the idea that complex numbers was this new and amazing idea that the Europeans developed that no one else had before. And that's something that they both have to hang on. Like, that's just the way they were brought up. And if you understand it to be literally just that's width to the other's length, all of this mystery drops away. And the idea that but then so too does the idea that it's a new idea drop away.
I do have Brother Adil in the back chat. I'm going to bring you up, brother, but try to keep it to our topic, because this is a very complex discussion that we're trying to unpack. We're not complex, but the discussion itself needs a lot of unpacking. So
good pun. We're not complex.
Yes.
But maybe Adil has a degree in
sorry,
physics and can help us.
Yeah. Adil, brother Adil. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sorry, you gave the notice of being to the topic very late. But this is I'm not sure if this is to the topic because I just connected. Basically, I have a brother. He's a Sunni, mashallah, very knowledgeable Muslim guy, but he's a flat Earth believer. and
Okay.
he advised me to do some reading and watch some documentaries for his evidence. I'm pretty sure he has some good arguments, and whatever he has researched has good evidence. Also, he argues that from the Quran and we can understand that the Earth is flat. What is your stance on this?
I do not think that you can argue the Earth is flat based on the Quran. I
No.
think the attempts to do so involve terrible logic applied to terrible linguistics. So relying on verses like "He spread out as a covering" and saying, "Hey, I guess that suggests flatness to me." It's and if you think about it, the navigation and astronomy and all this celestial mechanics and stuff was developed initially, in Greece and other places, but really became refined and really well understood and with great practical techniques during the Islamic Empire. They were the masters of astronomy and map making and navigation and stuff. And they used the celestial sphere, surrounded by a sphere. They used the spherical model of the Earth. They knew since Aristophanes that you could even calculate the diameter of it. So, and they were all fully aligned with, again, most of these people were polymaths who were also deeply deep in their religious knowledge, as well as in their knowledge of other subjects, maths or physics or medicine or whatever it was. So if it were true that the Quran calls out and says that it's flat and that's the correct way to understand it, there would have been uproar, much like you saw the uproar in the Catholics, with regard to the centrality of the Earth.
It wouldn't be a silent part of our history by any means whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
this idea that it's flat is really new. From or rather that it is definitely implied that it's flat. Some early scholars may have thought maybe it's supporting that idea, but no one's definitively said
that's right.
that.
So here
but brother Adil,
I wouldn't, because
brother Adil, here's the thing. I don't want to digress too much from what this video is about, right? Just we can probably discuss this later if you're okay with that.
We can do after the video. I mean, I will give a very brief. I'll try and be brief and see if I can sort of keep it on topic-ish, because I used to go sailing. I've got a sort of skipper's license, and I'm old school, so I've also got a sextant. So I know that to use a sextant, you need to account for the dip. It's what's called a dip correction, and I know myself have been there. And if you don't, you get the wrong distances. You use sometimes the missing. If you have, there was a time I was sailing around in Antigua, and there was like a harbor there where a bunch of tall ships were coming, and you could judge the speed of a ship coming and approaching you when you first see the masts, and then you see the bit of the top of the boat, and then you eventually start to see the bottom of the boat, then eventually you see the bow wave. You can judge how fast it's coming towards you. Use that to avoid collisions. That and its angle relative to you to avoid collisions and judge their timing and so on. So these are also signs. The word ayat, as used for an ayat of the Quran, ayat is also the signs in the world. And so if you find an inconsistency, the problem is you. This is always the case, or rather not you specifically, but whoever sees an inconsistency among Allah's signs, they are being shown something that they need to update about their understanding. They're the ones who have a problem. And if you look at some of Allah's signs, it becomes very clear that the earth is round. Or rather, this is interesting because a lot of people having these discussions aren't actually even adequately able to specify the shape of something well enough to have those discussions. Technically it's not a sphere. It's kind of spheroidal, but actually that's the surface. Or actually, which surface? Are you talking about the surface of the atmosphere? Are you talking about the boundary layer where the atmosphere meets the crust? Are you talking about, actually the shape of the earth, if you're an atomist, is the shape of billions and billions and billions of tiny points, which is not a continuous surface like a spiritual. So there's sort of this weird mismatch I see where people approach this topic using ideas that are maybe more sophisticated than they realize, and then finding themselves getting lost. I think this brings it back to the Oppie and William Lane Craig argument. I think, on the one hand, you tell people the idea of the Earth's a sphere and the ways to prove it, and it seems quite simple. But actually, if you go into a lot of mathematical detail, then it becomes non-trivial, and you have to really understand a lot of evidences and how they hang together to be able to support your position.
So we'll continue, brother, with you. You would have to wait in the back chat so that we can finish up this video.
No problems. Sorry, guys, I didn't know the chat what the topic is. I just logged in, so
yeah.
I saw brother Islam Hakim, and I know that he deals with this type of thing, so just joined it. So thank you very much. I'll log out. So
and you can reach out to the brother. You can reach out to the brother through email or privately. You can connect.
No problem. The only thing that I logged in is because all the time when we start this discussion, he told me, "Oh, you're."
Sorry, I lost you there.
Yeah, the same. All right.
Hello.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost you.
Sorry. The only somebody called me. So the only reason I logged in is because every time we discuss this, he tells me, "Oh, this is Western science. You shouldn't believe it. You should believe in the word of Allah." And I'm like, okay. And I try to stop it there. But anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I agree with him on that. We believe in the word of Allah, not Western science. But I don't believe the Earth is round based on Western science, and the Islamic Empire did not believe the Earth is round based on Western science, because it didn't exist at the time when the Islamic Empire believed the Earth was round.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much, Faisal, Islam Hakim, for all the work you do.
All right, brother.
We love you, brothers. Jazakallah
khair. All right, let's get back. William Lane Craig is going to try and respond.
Mathematical concepts do find very practical applications. For example, in something as simple as electrical engineering, complex numbers turn out to be critical and very useful. But I don't think it's true that what drives the working mathematician is scientific utility. The philosopher of mathematics, Penelope Matty, has written eloquently on what she calls maximizing principles in mathematics, which he says are of a sort that is quite unlike anything that turns up in the practice of the natural sciences. She says, and I quote, "Crudely, the scientist posits only those entities without which she cannot account for our observations, while the set theorist posits as many entities as she can, short of inconsistency." And Matty identifies quite a few of these, what she calls rules of thumb, that are followed by mathematicians in choosing their axioms and constructing their theories, such as maximize, richness, diversity, one step back from disaster, etc. And in a similar way, Wigner, in his article, observes, and I quote, "The great mathematician fully, almost ruthlessly, exploits the domain of the permissible reasoning and skirts the impermissible." So it does seem to me that mathematics is driven by this a priori quest for mathematical fruitfulness, the sort of fruitfulness that you said disappointed some mathematicians when Wiles proved Fermat's last theorem. They want to see mathematical richness, but scientific applicability isn't what drives the mathematician. And therefore, these disciplines, it seems to me, are very different in the way in which they operate.
So I don't think anything I said contradicted what you just said then. So I wasn't suggesting that what was driving the mathematicians was applicability to the natural sciences or to the sciences generally, but it's mathematical problem solving, which is not an aesthetic consideration. It's I want to work out what the answers are, right? So I've got these real valued equations, right? I want to be able to solve them. It turns out the only way you can solve them analytically is by making this detour through the complex plane. So one way of explaining how complex numbers get into mathematics in the first place is from a desire to solve puzzles of another kind. How do I solve these equations, these real value equations? How do I give exact solutions to them? And so I'm thinking that's not aesthetic, it's something else. It's a challenge of trying to get the right answers that drives mathematical innovation. And that Wigner's stuff about kind of inutility and beauty and things like that isn't the primary consideration for mathematicians generally. That was my thought. So I just wanted to disagree with
I feel quite certain, having digested Wigner's article, that he understands aesthetic in a broad sense that would include mathematical problem solving. He often talks about how the mathematician chooses concepts on which he can exercise his mathematical ingenuity and develop formal beauty. So certainly mathematical problem solving would be included in this. And I think Wigner would call that broadly aesthetic. I myself prefer to refer to it as a priori. It's not an investigation of the empirical world, but it's a purely a priori discipline that then finds unexpected application in many cases in the laws of nature.
Can I jump in here real quick? And can I get like explain it to me like I'm 5 of this, of where we're at so far in this argument? Because everything that's happened so far is just right over my head. So how does this apply to the argument from the applicability of math to the universe?
Okay, so let's go back. Maybe
Pretend
I'll get Bill to read out his first premise again. Okay. And that would be that kind of most helpful.
Mathematical concepts arise from the aesthetic impulse in humans and have no causal connection to the physical world.
Right. So I'm thinking about the first bit, just the mathematical concepts arise from an aesthetic impulse. The way that I would understand that just sounds false. It just sounds way too narrow. So that's what I was worrying about because it was the first premise in the argument. But what Bill's been saying is that maybe we should understand the aesthetic impulse in a fairly general, a more extended sense than you ordinarily would, so that it would pick up what I think is what much of mathematics is motivated by is unsolved problems in mathematics, and you're trying to work out what the answers are. And that doesn't feel to me like it's an aesthetic impulse, right? It's something much more truth directed, because you want to work out what the right answers are.
Well, okay, now I would be cautious there, Graham, because, for example, there are alternative set theories, and set theorists are very happy to adopt more restricted axiom sets and explore the consequences, or to adopt additional axioms and to see what those consequences would have, or to opt for an entirely different set of axioms. And so there's a variety of different set theories. And the question isn't, are they true? It is rather, as you say, the sort of mathematical problem solving. So I would be cautious about saying that mathematicians are motivated by a desire to figure out what is true.
So I think yes and no. So there's a controversy amongst set theorists about whether there's one true set theory or not. And there are people like Hugh Wooden who say yes, and then there are many people on the other side who say no. But if you look at some of the things that are controversial in set theory, so where you can take an alternative route and develop an alternative set theory, so you can do set theory without choice or without the continuum hypothesis, to pick two examples. Yes. Most working mathematicians are perfectly happy to accept both choice and the continuum hypothesis. And sure, you can explore what happens if you gave them up. But if you look at so for example, to go back to the example that we were talking about before, Wiles's proof requires, that is his proof of Fermat's last theorem, requires the axiom of choice. Very few people have objected to the proof on the grounds that it assumes choice. Most working mathematicians think that's just fine. And that view is consistent with thinking, okay, what would happen if you gave up choice? What would set theory look like? Right, but that's just a different kind of problem that mathematicians might be interested in, which doesn't undermine the idea that if Wiles's proof is a proof, it shows that what Fermat said was true. Right, that's the. So I'm not sure whether that's entirely satisfactory. Anyway, maybe we should move on to another.
Well, let me get to Cameron's question about how would we explain this to a 5-year-old. Suppose you're trying to figure out how many gallons of paint you need to paint the floor of the playroom. Well, what you would do is you would say the playroom is square or rectangular, you would measure the distance in feet one way and then the distance in feet the other way, and then you would multiply these together to figure out how many square feet are in the room, and then you would find out how much paint you need, say, per square foot, and that will then tell you how much paint you need to paint your room. That's an example of the applicability of mathematics. You can figure out how much paint you need by mathematics. Now, that is very, very elementary, but that's what you asked for. Wigner's point is that when you get into relativity theory, quantum mechanics, quantum electrodynamics, there you have mathematical equations of breathtaking complexity and astonishing accuracy in describing the physical phenomena. Is that clear?
Yes, that's very clear. But it's not.
Okay. There was a lot that was said in all of this.
Yeah, but it's a lot of going back and forth over the same thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this comes down to not really understanding this concept of aesthetics in mathematics. I think William Lane Craig sort of understands it, maybe intuitively better, but he's not making a very good job, I think, of explaining it.
Mhm.
And I wonder if that's for lack of examples or something else.
And,
But Oppie
and at
doesn't
the
seem to
same
get
time,
it at all,
yeah,
which is really surprising.
is it because accepting aesthetic in mathematics or in anything, basically this additional dimension of understanding things means that you're in a sense accepting a designer?
I
Is
think
that sort of a
I think
hold
that's
up
the
for
case for some people, for some thinkers. Yeah,
Mhm.
particularly if you have this view of the Christian view of creation, where it creates things and these things operate by their own, the way they were designed and made, and then in a sense are independently operating. This is what led to people coming to ultimate ends of like Spinoza's God and so on as being some legitimate version of it. None of them really have the proper understanding of qadr that we have in Islam, where Allah actively manages everything all of the time, and so it's not that things have their own independent nature. Nothing is independent of him. He's the only thing that's independent of all other things, and it's this dependency relationship that I think is really key to sort of unlocking this. So yeah, I guess it's more to do with if they want to think of maths as being some grounding for reality, because once they've thrown out, or some grounding for reason, because once they've thrown out God as being the grounding, they need a new grounding, and maths was supposed to be this thing, because they fell for this trick where such and such is proved true in maths, not realizing that means true relative to these axioms, and that actually that makes things very circular when it comes to applying maths to reality. And this thing about maths driven by aesthetics, wherever you look, these so-called big unsolved problems and so on, it is exactly because given those axioms and the rules that go along with developing those axioms into conclusions, there are then some conclusions that can be constructed in that system that look like they should be provable. So in a sense, it's like a puzzle that's not been completed. I mentioned before the fundamental theory of the fundamental theorem of algebra, which was all very neat, and everything was sort of nice and completed, which is really nice. It was aesthetically very good. It's a type of aesthetic. Everything seems to fit. People, I think, who are maybe have OCD about pictures not being quite aligned, or a puzzle that's missing some pieces, might really get this better than others. Like, there's a definite aesthetic difference between a completed puzzle where all the pieces are in place and you can see how all the pieces fit, versus a puzzle where some of it's in place and some of it's not, and you're not sure whether the other pieces fit. Some people, if you give them a puzzle where one of the pieces is swapped for one that just will never fit, will find it funny, and some people will find it really upsetting. But either way, there's a definite aesthetic around it. It's exactly the same thing with the formal mathematics, and it is either developed by attempted application to reality, in which case it's really sort of the reality that's feeding and shaping and forming the resulting formalism, or it's aesthetic. And when it's done entirely internally within mathematics, it's aesthetic, even if it's problem solving, because the problem itself is a problem of how do I make this stuff all fit nice. He mentioned set theory versus axioms and optimization problem. If viewers have a question on that, we can go into it, but I don't think it's that central. This a priori quest for fruitfulness is exactly this misunderstanding. The a priori, meaning the in the mathematical world only, is this quest for completing the picture of the puzzle, for getting the aesthetic completion, for it looking nice. That's all it can do internal to itself. It doesn't have any other yardsticks. This consistency is an important part of the aesthetic overall. If you don't have consistency, you don't worry about consistency, you're not even in the realm, in the right gallery for mathematics. So consistency is one of those things. And then, closure is something that follows quite closely afterwards. These again, ultimately aesthetic drivers. If I just quickly go to, what was these other notes? It made me laugh when he said something as simple as electrical engineering. Well, again, actually the development of complex analysis and operational mathematics to be able to do electrical engineering was quite a feat. It's certainly not actually that simple. If it was understood to be a geometric way of thinking about matter and about its movement, then it would be no mystery, and it would just be a very complicated application of geometry. So yeah, I think that was the main thing, is just to show what this aesthetic really is. And so it's a false dichotomy to say, oh, it's problem solving, so it's not aesthetic, or to say the definition of aesthetic has been blown up too much if you include problem solving, because problem solving internally to maths is about the aesthetic, but problem solving, as he raised, with finding the right integral to some LCR circuit in electrical engineering, is about application to reality.
It's so interesting that he talks about solving the puzzle, and the very idea of a puzzle is that aesthetically it looks complete to you.
Yes,
that's what this
exactly
is about,
this.
right? So to miss this whole concept when you're basically trying to say exactly that, or pointing to exactly that, and not being able to see that, just is very telling to me.
And it actually comes back to this need for math to be some foundation of truth, rather than it just being a way of constructing elements of language that are particularly well specified.
And here's the thing, when we talk about one of the arguments for the existence of God, I'm forgetting who it was who had this argument that things are beautiful, and since things are beautiful, things are aesthetically pleasing to us, that was enough of an argument that God must exist for that person. I'm forgetting whose argument this was, but this was a very beautiful argument.
It's interesting because superficially, especially to an atheist, it would have seemed like the dumbest argument ever.
Yeah.
But actually, if you go deep, it's actually quite smart.
Profound
I think,
argument.
Yeah, yes. I think it still has holes, because a naturalist can still deal with beauty as because they've got the black hole of evolution theory. Just say somehow, some way, we don't know, there was some evolutionary advantage to this thing that we now label aesthetic. So they always have that get out clause because of that article of faith that they hold. So it's not like a killer shot, but I think it is very nice. It highlights something very nice, and it reminds me actually of Gödel's ontological proof, which just reads like the most completely insane attempt to prove God ever. It's not exactly the same as, but not too far from saying we can imagine this great God, and it would be even greater if he really existed. so he exists. um, which again sounds insane, but if you are a groundbreaking logician like Gödel and you understand the development of modal logic and the different kind of accepted basic axioms, S4 and S5 and whatever different ways of putting together your founding axioms of logic, then this does become a solid logical argument. So it gives the logicians pause, but it's not going to give many other people pause. I think this is the problem with any of the proofs for existence of God. They will they'll work for some people and not others. Just like proof that the earth is round and flat will work for some people and not others.
Yep. All right, let's see. I think this is where the arguments start getting interesting. By the way, I can stay for about 20-25 more minutes, and then we'll come back for this and just speak a bit about what we're going to do going forward. We're going to start the stream early, so it's a bit of a challenge for some of our brothers in the Western Hemisphere, right? However, it might be a more appropriate time for the brothers in Europe or in South Asia and other places. But the reason is that we're not going to be able to continue these streams unless we do this during weekdays, weekends. Sorry, weekdays. If we do end up doing a stream on weekdays, it would be a sort of shorter stream, right? And it will have to be early in the morning due to some other commitments that the two of us have, right? So bear with us. These will build up as we move along, and these will allow you to gather a lot of information about, like we're trying to do here, unpack a lot of these more complex discussions and allow you to have these conversations with people who are speaking pretty much a very different language than what an average person would do. All right, let's continue.
Not clear where the disagreement was happening, how that relates to the example that you just gave.
And it'll be hard to bring it out in respect of that example, because it's quite plausible that the mathematics that we're using there was originally developed for practical applications. So if you think about elementary arithmetic and elementary geometry, it was precisely because we wanted to do bookkeeping and work out how to apportion odd-shaped plots of land equally amongst heirs and things like that, that elementary mathematics developed. So it was designed precisely for its application to real-world problems. And Wigner's worries don't come up in connection with elementary arithmetic, for example.
Right, and he grants that point.
Yeah. So
because
it's not going
to
help. So you want a different example. You want one, Cameron, you want an example where there's something a bit more uncanny about the applicability. So go back to the concepts that Wigner picks out, so the complex numbers. When you think about the square root of -1, right, the kind of defining thing for the complex numbers, and then you think about electrical circuit theory, and you wonder what on earth could the square root of -1 have to do with the equations that we use to describe current flow in electric circuits, or a bunch of other applications to the natural world of the complex numbers. Then it's puzzling, you might think, in a way that the applicability of elementary arithmetic or geometry isn't. Bill, does that sound about right?
Yes, I like that. I thought that was quite clear.
And then what's the next step?
Well, the other thing was that mathematical objects have no causal connection with the physical world.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So this really is the key point in all of this. So this is why it's worth pausing it now. This is where I think they're both wrong. I don't know if that's, maybe they're better aligned with Wigner than I am, but whatever it is, I think this elementary arithmetic, as they put it, should also be regarded as a miraculous gift that we have. I don't think it's right to put in this artificial sort of dividing line, and this artificial dividing line is the problem. So when Graham Oppy says complex numbers are defined by the square root of -1, I had to laugh, because in the modern axiomatization of complex numbers, the square root of -1 does not exist. It's not in there. It's you to do the axioms, you put the axioms of a field, and you put together these multiplication rules. You have pairs of real numbers and multiplication rules between them, and those things define the complex numbers. And then the existence of an element that squares to -1 comes out. It is not put in by axiomatic fiat, so it's not part of the defining features. Again, it points to an unfortunate missing of some of the sort of depth and reason why complex numbers exist and work in the first place, and therein lies the rub. That's why you've got a problem. If they were to understand this, then like elementary arithmetic, he said, bookkeeping and stuff. Well, the bookkeeping was with numbers, these things that were discrete, separate, 1, 2, 3, 4. We described as counting stuff before. And when you divide two numbers in the system, in the world of numbers, you have A divided by B equals C with a remainder D. There's a remainder unless they happen to be an exact multiple of each other. And you had to sort of include this remainder term. So that including the remainder thing is what we now call modular arithmetic. But that's really what arithmetic always actually was. But you keep count of how many times you've gone around the module as well, with the position of numbers. So that's sort of what numbers actually were. But when you defer the division and say, I'm going to assume that I could figure out those things if I wanted to, and having a bunch of ratios, I could figure out the lowest common denominator of all of them so that everything becomes a number. So I'm not going to bother doing it. I'm just going to keep it as a ratio of some number divided by some other number. And I can still use it like a number, meaning I can still pop it in these equations where I can add things. I can multiply and divide and multiply it by itself and so on. The legitimacy of that comes from the relationship that they established between number and geometry. So at that point where they started using so-called rational numbers, where they keep the division deferred, they've now stepped into the world of geometry. All of this is fascinating and incredible. And the challenge, if you like, really goes to the evolutionists. You can say, well, hang on a minute. Why is this elegant capability that we have present when it sort of seems to run counter to the evolutionary theory that we should have some system that goes so deep, so far, much further and deeper than we need for our survival needs? Having more information and more sort of distractions and other kind of things is kind of counter in a way to your survival and reproducibility. Like a lot of people who really understand this stuff deeply and think really deeply are often sort of hit by a paralysis of not being able to do or act or something like that. And actually the people who don't really get it are often the ones who just have this Dunning-Kruger and gung-ho and go for it. And some of them fail and some of them succeed. But there's definitely advantages to not overthinking. So why would we have this capacity for overthinking? It becomes something that's not impossible, but becomes not even difficult to explain. But to explain it, you need to bring about and really sort of show the number of separate a priori axioms you have, the number of articles of faith that your reasoning starts from. And this is where I say that I don't need any other a priori articles of faith once I have the Shahada.
Yeah.
So,
by the way, I do have an ex-Muslim who's joined us.
All right.
Let's actually bring him up and see what.
Just if you don't mind, give me 1 second. I just need to.
Sure. All right. I'll bring you up, ex-Muslim.
Hey, how you doing, bud? How's it going?
Going okay. How about yourself?
I'm all right. Is this only for atheists or Christians?
This is for
Everybody?
atheists. Are you an ex-Muslim, which means
Yes.
you were a Muslim, but now what are you?
I um, that's what my name says.
So you're actually defining yourself by your ex. So you
Mhm.
were,
No, I don't define by my. I'm just for the stream because
no, what are you now? What do you believe in now?
I don't really believe in anything at this time.
So you're lost.
What do you mean lost? What do you
If you don't
mean?
have any beliefs, then you're pretty
No,
much
I
lost, right?
wouldn't say lost. I'm just don't believe in anything. I'm not here to bash Islam. I'm not here to do that, to
No,
make
no, no,
fun of
you're not.
religion.
But
I'm just saying generally. I
the
just don't
reason,
follow religion anymore.
no,
So
no, the reason I'm asking you this question is because if you're going to tell me what you're not by saying that you're not a Muslim anymore because you were a Muslim, now you're not, that doesn't give me any clue about who you are now. I'm trying to understand who you are right now. Are you an atheist? Are you an agnostic? Are you something else?
I just don't believe in anything anymore. There's nothing to believe in.
Then you're lost.
But I don't go around, like making fun of people's religion or religious beliefs. I don't do any of that. So
No,
that's
no,
something
no.
you don't have to worry about.
I'm,
I'm not here to make fun of anybody's faith or
I'm not. I'm not
Oh, good.
that's what I'm
accusing
Do
trying to
you of
that.
explain to
anything
you.
like
I
that.
just don't believe it because there's nothing to believe in. It just doesn't matter anymore,
So
you
so
know.
let me just try and if
Because
I
when you die, that's it. That's it. There's
can
nothing.
I
There's
can
no
I
heaven.
just
There's no hell.
can I
That's it.
just before we go too far on the thing, can I just
Mhm.
try and understand this statement? It's a very interesting, important one.
Hmm.
There's nothing to believe in anymore. I mean, if I take that as an absolute statement, it would mean that there is literally nothing that you believe to be true at all about anything in any realm on Earth or otherwise. I guess that's a bit extreme. I guess you do believe that we're having a conversation, for example.
Yeah, we're having a conversation, but you're talking about belief in God, and I'm just saying because there's nothing to believe at this point because there is no heaven, there is no hell. Even if
Right. So
you're a
pull
Christian,
back
so
from
no,
that.
I'm not
Let's
following any religion, is what I'm
yeah,
trying to
yeah.
tell
No,
you.
I
There's nothing to
My brother,
believe.
I get you.
you're
Try and
repeating yourself here.
yeah, try and
We're,
follow what I'm saying. Try and
mm,
follow what I'm saying. I said, with regards to anything in reality, first of all, we need to understand this thing that you're talking about called belief that you have in some things and not in other things, and examine what you even mean by this word and or what it means for things to be true. This is relating to your epistemology of things, if you know that word.
I'm not following Satanism, none of that. I'm just trying to tell you that I'm not
we're not.
following
We're not
anything.
accusing
No,
you
I
of
mean, so okay, here
either.
let's take some concrete examples. Do you believe that the Earth is basically round, or do you believe it's basically flat, or you don't know?
Yeah, of course, I believe the Earth is round because of the photos, and you can go travel out of space and send a telescope, and
Okay,
yeah.
good. Right, so we've got something really concrete here, And do you believe that if I drop this little upset spoon, if I let my fingers go, it's going to fall?
Of course, yes, because
Okay,
I'm witnessing it. I see it. So
cool. Okay, so we've established two things that you do believe. So it's not that there's no beliefs or nothing can be true. It's you're talking more
but I'm
about some.
talking about religious perspective. That even if it's Christianity or Judaism, Hinduism, and any faith. I'm not just speaking about Islam. I'm speaking about any faith. There's nothing to believe in anymore because when we die, that's it. So life is just what we have now. That we
So
just
when
have
you
to live our
say
life. That's it.
we die, that's it. That
That's it.
sounds to me like
There's nothing after that.
right. So
Do
that's
you
something
know?
you're stating as if it's a fact, but it seems that's just your belief, right?
I could be wrong. I could be right. We don't know. You could, to you could be wrong. You're right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, you see
But
the difference in the dynamic is if you're stating assertively and categorically that there's this life finishes and that's it, that's one thing. That's making a strong positive claim, and the question then becomes, what's the evidence or the reasoning behind that? Why do you believe that? But if you say, well, I don't really know, we don't know what will happen after our death, it's quite a different discussion.
Why would we be here in the first place? That if there's life is full of
you're
pain and suffering, why are we were here because our parents came together, life came, gave, we were born through our mothers, and some people are lucky to have a good life. Some people are, some people just have bad luck,
Well,
So
some people have.
life is just what it is. What's just happens, It
So
just,
when
that's
when
it.
you say when you say we're here because our mother and father got together, do
Yeah,
you
it's like an
mean
evolution, like a cycle keeps going, 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 going. That's it.
so here's the thing. Um, I don't want to call you X, and you're definitely not a Muslim. So is there a name that we can actually address you by? It
Uh,
doesn't have to be your real name if you don't
you
want to
could
give it
just
out,
call
but
me. You could just call me Sam. That's it.
Sam. Okay.
Sam? Cool.
So Sam, here's the deal. When the first thing that we want to make sure that you understand is that you do have beliefs. Or- All right.
Yeah, but
You've
it's not.
come.
It's not
Wait,
religious.
wait.
It's not
Listen,
based on
listen, my friend.
religion.
Just listen. Okay. Just listen. Right now, you've come here because you had questions. You wouldn't have jumped on just because you didn't have any questions. So just listen to us, and we'll give you the opportunity to speak. All right. So you do have beliefs. What we're trying to do is make you realize what your own belief system is, right? Because nobody in this world actually exists without beliefs. Even the idea that we do science is actually based on certain beliefs that certain principles hold true and that we can apply them consistently on how we observe reality. Maths is based on beliefs. Everything to its core stems from the beliefs that you have, right? So, what we're trying to do is establish what those beliefs are, and then we can start having a conversation. Because right now, it's just like you're in the dark, literally, and we're in the light. You can see where we're coming from because you know we're Muslims. This is what we will believe in. We have no idea who you are. So you got to turn on the light for us to have a conversation. Do you understand, my friend?
Okay.
Okay. So the reason why we're asking you this question, this is not to just, this is not about attacking you. This is about asking you to explain yourself to us. And then we can probably have a better conversation, right? And hopefully it will benefit you as well to understand where you stand right now and then ask the questions, is it really true what I believe in, or is it uh, does it not matter? Because from what I understand, at the very least, one of the things you and I can agree on is that truth matters, or does it not?
I mean, truth matters. Yeah. I mean, it does. I mean, you cannot lie. Obviously, if it's not, if it's true, it's true. If it's a lie, it's a lie. But I'm not saying, entirely everything that, that religion teaches is false, but it's not entirely true
Nobody
either.
is bringing in religion right now, my friend.
Okay.
We're not getting there. We'll get there later on. Right now, we're just establishing a common belief that you and I can share that we can start with, right? That truth matters. If you believe in that, okay, then we can have a conversation and we can take this forward. Because
Mm.
otherwise, if you don't believe in the idea that truth matters, and I believe in the idea that truth does matter, right? We won't be able to see or agree on anything because we have completely different views.
Mm.
If
It's
there
it's an
would be no
excellent starting
conversation.
point that we have, because if truth matters, truth matters to me. It mattered to me when I identified as atheist as well. When I thought I was an atheist, I should say. And I did not want religion in the slightest. I was raised to very much hate them. In fact, much more negative attitude towards them than you have even. And I came to Islam because I believe it is true. And when I say that, I started learning about Islam while I was doing my degree in theoretical physics. And it became very evident and apparent to me that the existence of Allah, specifically the God, monotheism as expressed in Islam, was better evidenced and more, basically a surer truth than the existence of the electron, than many other things that I studied, whether it be classical or quantum physics or stuff that I studied in mathematics. And so I essentially dragged my nafs, you should understand that term, kicking and screaming, because I believed that Islam is true, is actually true. So if truth matters, then we do have some very interesting discussions to have. But I would need to know a little bit about your understanding of how observations and evidences relate to reality and what's true, because my understanding comes from the way it works in physics. I don't know to what extent that matches up with yours.
So what I see as faith and belief in God is a game of luck. What I see believing in God, man, it's like I don't know if I don't know if you ever gambled or played a lottery, right? Lottery, it's a game of luck. There's millions of people playing lottery, right? They're buying a lottery ticket. Whoever wins gets $1 million, right? That's how I see faith, believing in God as. It's a game of luck.
How?
You may, because in Islam they say that it's not guaranteed because no one knows if you're going to heaven or hell. Even if you could be doing good, you could end up in hell. You could be doing bad, you could end up being in heaven. So it's a game of luck. That's what
Well,
I see.
it's not. It's not.
It is. It's just like lottery. You asked me. I'm telling you. This is
Yeah.
what I believe in. This is how I see. It's just a game of luck. You know what I mean?
No,
A
I
lot
can
of
see
bad
that.
things happened to me in life, and it was done by Muslims. That's what happened when I was younger. I was abused. I've been through so much. People that hurt me, they were basically my own people. You know what I mean? So why
Yeah,
am I
and
going to follow something, that it's just a game of luck? That's not going to help me.
well, so I mean, it's interesting because, for me, it's very clear that there is no role for the word luck in the Islamic perspective. So what you left, if it was a game of luck, then I don't know exactly what you left, but it wasn't really the Islamic perspective. And in fact, this idea of luck really comes from, or really has historical roots in Fortuna, and the deification of fortune or chance. And so to say it's a matter of, or it's determined by luck, is actually a type of polytheism. It's already a belief in a polytheist deity. It's interesting because one of the key turning points of me from atheism, was the understanding that it's only according to the Enlightenment redefinition of deity that I could claim to be an atheist. And if I understood deity the way it was understood by the Hebrew speakers, the Aramaic speakers, the Arabic speakers, and by all sorts of other nations prior to the European Enlightenment, then I wasn't an atheist. I was a polytheist. And I suspect I've yet to meet an atheist who does not have many gods.
So you were an atheist at a point in your life. That's what you're saying.
Oh, I was saying quite a lot more than that, but
But
yeah.
you were an atheist Or
Yeah,
okay.
I was raised and lived mostly as an atheist. I went to study physics because basically because of my atheist ideology.
So let me ask you this: if you were, if if people that did you wrong in life that just happened to be your own people, you
As was the case.
since
Yeah.
childhood, and let's say there are all the Muslims that did bad to you, they did you wrong, they since growing up, like is that something you want to follow? Like that's something you want to believe in?
So for me, I had to put aside all those kind of emotive angles or elements because I was concerned principally with the truth. I had a lot of bad experiences with, atheists or people without religion. I had a lot of bad experiences with people with religion. I'm autistic as well, so I mean, I really didn't fit in with anyone in many ways, and I was treated very badly by pretty much most people. From it didn't really matter what their religious or claimed non-religious perspective was. That wasn't the major correlating factor with whether or not I was treated badly. I think if you look at the correlating factors, you'll find that there are other better correlations than religion. So it wouldn't make sense for me to blame the religion either way, especially because I've been treated very badly by non-religious people as well.
Let me ask you: do you think you're gonna go to heaven or hell? Like, do you think that okay, you died today, you're gonna enter heaven? Do you believe in that?
So if I die right now, this moment, then to the best of my understanding, I should go to Jannah because I'm currently practicing Muslim. However, that doesn't mean that I would avoid the fire, because you can go to the fire before you go into heaven. So that's a different question, but I should ultimately eventually get to heaven. However, I can't guarantee, I don't know when I'll die, and I can't guarantee that I will still testify Shahada at the moment of death. And that's the key thing. So I need to hold back from a certain level of arrogance by saying, yes, I will, no, I won't. And that's the sense in which there's this uncertainty, which you characterized as luck. And it's important for us to sort of bear that in mind and be thankful for what we have, rather than to sort of arrogantly say, yeah, I'm going to heaven.
Okay. So now, but people don't know that they're going to end up in heaven because they could be praying, they could be practicing, they could be worshiping, and they can still end up in hell though because of something they might have did. So like, you're not sure if you're going to enter heaven, even if you could be doing all the good things.
So
that you're
do
supposed
you
to
know that people who go into hell, in Islamic view, people who go into hell do not all necessarily remain there?
It's what I'm saying is so it's like prison time. You go to jail for stealing something, you spend time in prison 30 days, and then you come out. That's what you mean.
Well, I mean, it's not quite for a length of time. We need to be a bit careful with the subtleties here, but
I guess
essentially,
certain crimes.
some people will, by the time so let's go through the eschatology, right? So I build up some sins, I've asked for forgiveness for some, so on and so forth. I have some certain state when I go into the grave. The grave could either be comfortable, glad tidings, or there could be punishment and other stuff happening in the grave. And if, like, the key thing is that nobody will get into Jannah while they still have a spot of arrogance on them. Right? We have hadith in relation to that. So one way or another, your arrogance at least needs to be purged by these various kind of processes. Do it the easy way, you can take it the hard way, or the even hardest way, which is if it's still not purged by barzakh, by the grave, then you go into the hellfire. But if you died a Muslim, then eventually you'll get pulled out of the hellfire as well, because no mustard grain of iman will be wasted. Everything with iman will be saved eventually. So I just wanted to differentiate between, getting to heaven is one thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you avoided the fire on your way. There's getting to heaven without touching the fire, and then there's getting to heaven with some passage through the fire, for want of a better word. and then there's never getting to heaven and only being in the fire, and they're different fates. It's quite important to distinguish.
So let me ask you something. So you're saying that the hellfire, that person who's in hell is going to be in hellfire temporarily.
Some of them will be pulled out, and some of them will never be pulled out
Why will some never be pulled out? What's the reason for that?
because they lack any iman.
They don't believe in God. That's
Oh,
it.
you're saying that, but even if they're like serial killers, murderers, rapists, they can still come out of hellfire.
Once they've completed their uh, time, they can.
But because they believed in God, is what you're saying. And it's
Yeah,
Well,
that is a bigger sin.
careful with
so
it though. Iman is a little bit deeper than just belief in God, especially with the framework of belief we've been talking about, because Iman is not completed without your speech and actions as well, right? This is something important that many scholars have gone into. So if you think about it this way, none of us are good enough for the perfect life, for Jannah, without the mercy and forgiveness from Allah. We could not be perfect. There's a lot of reasons for that. And if we're not perfect, but we're living together forever, then it would no longer be heaven. It would end up degrading over time. So there's a paradox to be solved here. Now, if you not just believe in, but appropriately approach the God, the meaning of Allah, al-ilah, the God. If you're able to believe and approach him with this submissive, humble, and asking for forgiveness kind of manner, then you can be forgiven, and then you can have this place in this good place. But if you don't, then you can't be forgiven, and so you can't have a place in a good place. And the longer you are rejecting of his mercy, the more bad stuff's going to build up, and you have essentially a self-made hell. So it makes a lot of sense that is the dividing line of the dividing criteria. It's not just it's not like as portrayed in South Park, where it's like the correct answer was the Mormons, everyone else go to hell now. There's nothing like that in
so
our
the Christians would say the same thing. Then, if you believe in Christ, I'm not a Christian, nor preaching, but I'm saying the Christians would say the same thing. If you don't believe in Christ, you won't be saved. If you believe in Christ, he'll forgive all your sins. That's just the same concept.
Subtly different though,
That's
because
just
for them, Christ took all the sins of everyone else, and so he's being punished on their behalf, and it's just by the fact of them believing that they no longer have sin upon them. So it's doesn't work very well logically, it doesn't work very well morally and ethically, it doesn't fit together very well. It is quite a substantially different idea. But the core that you're pointing to regarding belief being important, again, it makes a lot of sense why in the Islamic eschatology, because we need to be able to ask him for forgiveness, because that's the only way to deal with being imperfect creatures in a perfect environment. Whereas in Christianity, there's no explanation, and it doesn't make sense. There's a different eschatology. And also the Christians believe that you either go straight to heaven or straight to hell, or there's this purgatory kind of thing that you sort of hang in between. But they don't have the concept of people going to hellfire for some purification and coming out afterwards. So it is different.
Yeah. And by the way, I do want to take a pause here, and want to ask you this. Like, you currently do not even believe in a God. What does it matter to you about heaven or hell? These concepts come after, and if you, it doesn't matter if you don't believe in a God, these don't really matter for you, right? But they
Well, if you don't
cannot
believe
be
in
a
the
reason. Yeah, they cannot be a reason for you, right, to deny the existence of God. They're actually a consequence of believing in the existence of God. Then, if he said this is how things are going to play out, right, that's a consequence of believing in a God and the fact that he has communicated with us. And what he's communicated is that there's eternal bliss or eternal torment for you, right, depending on your choices in this world. A very simple concept. You follow the rules when you're driving on the road, or do you not follow the rules when you're driving on the road?
You have to follow the traffic laws, the
You have to
rules.
follow the traffic laws, right? So do you deny following the traffic laws, start breaking them because there's a consequence of breaking them? That, oh no, I would be put in jail. Why would you confine me, right? That I should not follow these traffic laws. There are no traffic laws. There is no government. Do you act like that? No, there is a consequence of it. So first, let's establish that there is a governing authority, right? And then these things would start making sense. We've actually gotten way ahead of ourselves in understanding what this is. So I do want to understand from you your reason for denying the existence of God.
And so the other thing is, why all the pain and suffering? If God is, powerful and He's perfect, then why put people through pain and suffering?
You,
Why
so
not just
so you
have?
want
Why
you
just not
want the
have a
eternal bliss?
heaven?
Yeah,
Are you
No,
you
but
want
familiar
why
the
with
why
the
not
eternal
just
term?
bliss.
have a heaven to begin with? Why not? Why even have a hell? Why even have this? Why just not even have? Why just have? Why not just have a simple heaven and just where
Are you
people?
familiar with the terms dunya and akhirah?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, just before I answer this question, I just want to prefix it by asking. It seems to me that the ideas around which you came to understand God, Allah, when you were younger, seem to not add up or make sense for you. And it seems to be on the basis of these things not adding up or making sense for you that you then think the idea of God doesn't make sense itself. Is that about right, or is there another sort of set of reasons?
As I mentioned earlier, I see it all as a game of luck. It's like a lottery. It's just you may. It's just it's luck. You know.
Well,
Is
it
it
can
luck?
Following.
Is
it
it
can look
luck?
like a, well, let's say a
Because
game of chance
if you
or a
die,
game
you
of
don't know where
randomness.
you're gonna end up at. You have no idea where you're gonna go.
No, no. Is it luck that gravity works in a certain direction? Is it luck that when a male and female get together, they have an offspring? Is it
Right.
luck that in the universe there's a certain amount of matter existing, that
Mhm.
the they're protons and not some form of an antiproton?
Yeah, so
Uh,
the thing here is to really distinguish this luck from this I don't know, or a lack of correlation, because a matter of luck is a whole different statement from it's something that I don't know how to determine. So probabilistic
So
is not necessarily
I
luck.
do want to clarify something to you that I am not a fake ex-Muslim. So I know
no,
about
no,
Islam
no.
because of my
We didn't ask
parents.
you.
No, no, hear me out. So
Yeah.
my father would pray 5 times,
Mhm.
and he died a long time ago. But just to let you know that I'm not one of those fake ex-Muslims. I can tell you that I know a little bit of Arabic and I understand um, about it. I just left the faith a long time ago.
No,
But I'm not one of those people who goes around bashing religion or making fun of people
Neither
I
one of
what
us
they
appreciate
believe in.
that.
made
I'm
that
just telling you
assumption.
from my honest point of view.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
a lottery. It's a game of
No,
luck. That's all
I
it is.
appreciate that, but this is why I'm saying we've got to stop just repeating this lottery game of luck, because
That's
again,
how I
if
see it because I
no,
don't know where I'm going to end up at. If I die right now, I don't know if I'm going to end up in hell. I'm going to end up in hell or
yeah,
heaven. I'm just letting you know. If I die
no,
today,
I
cancer or something happens,
understand, I
it's a luck.
understand. But this is
If I'm following God, if I'm worshiping God, I could
Look,
be
look, my
praying
friend,
5 times. I can
no,
still end
hang
up in
on,
hell.
no, but
my
this
friend.
is something
Let's hear.
we really need to pull apart. Like this question of probability, so of not having certainty, has to be separated from this question of luck. They are such fundamentally different concepts that when you mix them together, we'll end up going around in circles. We can't make progress until we've separated the question of being lucky from the question of uncertainty.
And Brother Islam, there's actually a more fundamental matter that I want to point out to him, which he needs to understand. There's actually a reason why he's come up here, right? It's not without reason that you this is not just random. Okay, you made a conscious choice to come up, right? There's something inside you that tells you there's truth to the idea that there's a cause for everything. There's something inside you that is making you question this very concept that you hold. Like I haven't taught you any of that. Brother Islam hasn't taught you any of that. It is there in you intrinsically. You know it, and that always causes you to question your current position. That's the reason why you're up here. If you're going to be really honest with yourself, you in your very nature is the idea of God exists there as just the part of who you are. You know he exists. Now, for you, you have to cloud that idea with all these other thoughts that you're trying to justify that why you shouldn't believe in it, right? All of these are just you distracting yourself from the truth, which you know yourself. And you've come up here, you're not hearing anything new. You know of this, that God must exist. There must be a reason for everything. If you really believe that all of this was just random, it was just luck, it was just some sort of something we cannot explain, you wouldn't believe in science. Because science, by very concept, is the idea that things have a design to it. That's why we do science. You wouldn't believe in math. You would say 1 plus 1 is equal to 7. And then the next time I would ask you, what is 1 plus 1? You would say 1 plus 1 is equal to 4. It's just luck. What ends up is just luck. You don't believe in luck. That is an excuse that you've come up with to cloud that idea, right? So for you, you need to realize this, that if you're going to take a step towards the truth, you need to get past these excuses that you've come up with. Give yourself a clean slate, because I sort of heard what you were talking about, the history that you have, right? And whatever you've gone through, not denying any of that, my brother. But if you're being told by someone that you go on the road and nothing's going to happen when there are fast moving cars, right? That's not going to change the reality of you getting hit and losing your life, right? So the truth is independent of what you believe in, right? The truth, you have, if your beliefs align with the truth, then you're actually satisfied with your current uh, belief system. Otherwise, you're always going to be questioning. And this is where this is coming from, my friend. So give yourself the leisure of looking past what your current worldview is, because that's not coherent. And that's what's causing you this pain in where you are right now. Brother Islam, sorry. I did
Yeah,
want to point
I'm
that out.
still here.
Yeah.
So it's just the thing. So if you look at it, you're you have to pray 5 times a day. You have to keep your fast. You have to observe. You have to, you know, of course, you have to do good, and then the results will be when you die. Then you will find out what your result is, where you're gonna end up at, right? So when I was mentioning earlier about this was that in- even no, you like if I because earlier I was asking you that if you die today, if you die now, where are you gonna end up at? You said possibly heaven, But is it? But then you know you can speak to someone else. They'll tell you that they don't know where they're gonna end up at. You know, you can put in all this work to worshiping God and praying, and you just
But does that take away from the fact that God exists? Does that take away from the fact that that is going to be the consequence if he said this is what the consequence is going to be? Does that take away from the pursuit of the truth that we're talking about? Because all of these arguments that you're talking about, right? They're all dependent. They just become mute points to this discussion if God exists.
Well,
That's
I
what we
wanted
should
to.
be doing.
Yes, I think obviously the existence question is critical, but there's a blocker here that I think we need to deal with
Mhm.
in relation to that. So if you
By the way, Brother Islam, I'm just going to bring Brother Adila. I have to go for probably about 15-20 minutes, and I'll let you and Brother Adil continue this discussion.
okay, so you know if you have an aircraft, right? Let's say there's an aircraft flying along. It's got 2 engines, 2 wings, all that kind of stuff, and one of the engines dies. If an experienced pilot who has done lots of training and really understood how planes work and how flying works and how emergency situations work, manages to land that plane, there's still, from the luck perspective, an element of luck. You know, depending on where you put it, you could say, oh, well, it's lucky the engineers thought of that ahead of time. Or you can say it's you know, lucky that the wind didn't get much better or worse than it was, or you know, lucky that transponder that tells you height hadn't gone out, or lucky that this airfield had that particular landing scenario that I needed, or was that distance away, or whatever. But if you have someone who's in the plane has never studied a thing in their life, and they just sort of take hold of those controls and randomly jiggle them about, and then the plane happens to land, then you might say that's luck or that's lucky, because he didn't have any underlying understanding of what was going on, essentially what the rules of the game are for getting a plane on the ground. Now, the experienced pilot isn't going to be able to really 100% guarantee landing a plane in a crisis, but they'll be pretty damn confident. But they'll always say, you know, never say never. They'll always say something else could happen, you know, and so on and so forth. They would, that humility is important to them, and it's important to seeing challenges come. But obviously, there's a difference between that and the person who has no idea what's going on, landing the plane. And this is where I'd say the analogy is with, you know, Islam is like having the rule book given of the game given by God. So we have like an extraordinary advantage. Plus, being able to ask for forgiveness means that we can have mistakes corrected. And so, again, I just don't want to overstep the bounds and say I am certain, because I have to recognize my fallibility, and I have to recognize the limits of humility. I have to recognize that Allah's judgment is known to him alone. These things are important in my own thinking and shaping, because life isn't just about, or this dunya isn't just about, you know, hanging around to find out your test result. You're actually growing throughout the entire journey. There is a purpose for every day, for everything that happens. So yeah, it's you're much more likely to pass the test, to use the terms likelihood, if you've you know, learned the rules and studied hard and worked on yourself hard. Remember, prayers are not. It's almost a wrong perspective to say prayers are you have to. They're required of you. I mean, yes, it's true, but you know, prayers are a gift. They're something granted to you. It's the completion of that sentence is you have to do them in order to stay well, in order to keep your heart clean, in order to stay progressing forward positively, in order to stay on track mentally, spiritually, emotionally. Does that make sense?
yeah. I understand what you're saying. Obviously, when you're practicing your faith, you know, you're staying away from things crimes. That I understand.
Well, if you're practicing it
That's what you
properly,
mean. That could be any faith. You're praying to God, and so you don't end up doing anything bad or evil, or you end up committing a crime, killing or hurting somebody. Because your faith won't allow you to do it, regardless
yeah,
of what you believe in.
yeah. Although some faiths would permit or justify various behaviors that I don't think should be permissible or justifiable. For me, Islam is unique and special in that when people do violate people, because people do sin, no one's perfect. Saying that Islam is perfect is not the same thing as saying Muslims are perfect, because Muslims are not. But a lot of people are ostensibly Muslim or identify as Muslim or have some Muslim concepts in their upbringing, but actually have a terrible, terrible understanding of it and implementation of it in their lives. And so they don't act like a Muslim should. Remember what I said before about Iman is completed by your speech and actions. Otherwise, it's not really good.
No, do you follow a certain I need to ask you this. So even amongst faith, the religion, there's divisions. Do you follow the Sunni or Shia? Like what do you or you what do you exactly follow?
So, I mean, if you split things in the Sunni versus Shia, then I'm Sunni.
I'm just wondering because I know there's in other faiths too. There's division and there's this.
It's a bit different in Islam though, because the split you're talking about there has one sort of certain historical origin, and it has then functional implications because of which hadith they'll accept. So they have basically different hadith books than us, and so on, and so there's some issues there. But I would also say that they take the Shahada, I take the Shahada. So we both agree that there's one God and Muhammad is the messenger. We both agree on the same Quran.
And are you also praying and fasting and you're observing all of that? Like
yes, yeah, but with some differences. So it tends
are you
to
learning
be,
something you're learning?
is what something I'm learning, sorry?
Like are you learning, you're praying 5 times and you're learning to pray 5 times.
Oh no, alhamdulillah, I've been praying 5 times. That's why I took my Shahada 19 years ago.
Okay.
I've been through a very complex history. I was a very, very strong practicer, and then I had a period that I call my Jahiliyyah in between, and then came back very strong, even stronger afterwards. So yeah, I've had ups and downs in that.
Okay.
But yeah, and I'm very, for me, even though most of these books are about maths and physics and stuff and philosophy, Islam is like the underpinning of my understanding of not just reality in the world and how it is, but also of how to behave and act as a human in this reality. This is something I wanted to raise very quickly, was just this, a believer, one of the marks of a believer, everyone should feel safe around them. They should feel like a believer should be very honest, very calm, very humble, very safe, very peaceful to be around. So any kind of abuse really highlights at least some problem in either implementation or understanding of Islam.
So earlier you were mentioning about God, right? That having a belief in God. Now, what happens to those people who are born? Because you mentioned you had a disability, right? You mentioned that earlier. But
Well,
there's
it's autism. It's a difference rather than it's
okay.
Yeah.
There's people who have disabilities, people who are blind and deaf, and some people are just born with a disability, and and they'll end up going to say a church and anything, but they have a disability, they're blind and deaf, and they're still going there. How does that play out for them? Is it a game of luck for them? Are they guaranteed to go to heaven? Are they guaranteed to go to hell? Like, or
No, I think
people?
the only ones I'm aware of who are guaranteed to go to heaven are children who die before they reach the age of accountability. So they go straight up to dance to the feet of Abraham. So for them, there's no uncertainty in that.
Someone older with a disability, serious disability, where they cannot move and they cannot speak, or they're
Yeah.
how does that? I'm saying, is that a game of luck for them? Is it because they're not praying 5 times, they're not doing all these things? Are they going to? Do they end up in hell? Do they end up in heaven?
Well, no, I
Or
mean, I mean, I'm not sure what would be the connection. Why would like this isn't karma and reincarnation or anything like that. And we don't believe, like the Christians, in original sin, right? And we don't believe that these things are happening to you sort of just as a punishment. They can be there's always some positive reason for them, and whatever occurs despite appearances is the most merciful resolution to things. Allah is the most merciful. Everything he does fits that. So, you might think it might seem horrible for someone to be blind, but there's pros and cons and reasons why that was better for them in whatever ways they needed to develop, or, or better for other people around them who are supposed to help them and, adjust for them to be welcome and fitting in and so on. And be able to participate in society fairly. And there's all this kind of goodness that comes from helping to address the presence of differences. We learn through that. Like, this is part of how we learn and grow and demonstrate good qualities and all this sort of stuff.
Okay. All right, I understand.
And
what you're
it's
saying,
interesting, just quickly, relates to what I said about autism. It is viewed as a disability often. And I think in Western society, it is usually a disability, but sometimes can give you a really big advantage in certain technical fields, for example, if you have the right sort of backing and background. And something I found is that in Islam, my autism was very, very naturally accommodated in a way that the secular society hadn't managed to do. There's all sorts of sort of interesting stuff to do with, backbiting, for example, is something that's a terrible sin in Islam, but it's part of normal social interaction in the West. And that's something that has a severe negative effect on autistic persons' ability to integrate society when backbiting is allowed. That's just
I
one.
think everyone does
example.
that, regardless of faith. I know everyone does that. I've seen people say bad things about other. It doesn't matter what they believed in. Whether they're atheist or not, or whether they're Christian, Jew, Muslim, Hindu. They could identify themselves or whatever, and they can still be talking bad about someone.
Yeah, for
Me
sure.
and you could
for
be
sure.
having a conversation right now, and we could be talking bad about somebody. Or not
this
just
is the
bad, or
thing.
we could say something bad. Maybe it's true, something that they did.
So I
like
try and
in a
avoid it.
conversation.
Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting because the way I was raised, I wouldn't try and avoid that. But now as a Muslim, I do try and avoid that because I do think it's a bad behavior. So for me, concretely, Islam does and has changed my behavior in a way that I think is an improvement. Remember, there's this big difference between, yes, people will still make mistakes or do the wrong thing, but that's different from whether or not the rule book or the things they should be doing is actually the right thing in the first place, right? So, like I said before, Islam being perfect doesn't mean Muslims are perfect. And I think there is generally in the Muslim world, you will find people look down upon or have a problem with backbiting more readily and more easily than they would in the West. In the West, it's so normal and part of normal cultural, in the culture, it's part of normal socialization. Whereas in, Islamic cultures, it's always been very frowned upon. And the view I said before about seeing the mercy from Allah and seeing things from a good perspective is fairly famously sort of inherited in the Persian storytelling. I was telling my birth mother was over in Iran and a while back. That's where. Anyway, I won't go into details. And she was telling me about the story of a car crash that was told. There was this car crash that happened, and they weren't talking about how many people died. They're talking about how many people survived. They're giving the same information, putting it all in slightly more positive spin or light. Even those kind of differences, they do ultimately come from the religious influence on the culture. So that is to say, and a long way around of saying, look, yeah, people do bad stuff, but it's not necessarily in anything like the same kind of ratios. And also, what really matters for you as an individual and for me as an individual is it going to improve you as an individual? Is it going to improve me as an individual? In terms of this taking on and practicing it. But again, I wouldn't practice it or give any weight to it whatsoever if I didn't believe that it's actually true. And the consequences of following Islam weren't really much of a factor in my belief or understanding that it is true. That came down much more to the ways I assessed whether or not and how I came to believe in things, which was more to do with physics and how I came to believe things in physics, and more to do with sort of quite deep philosophical discussions and arguments and positions analysis, rather than this sort of trying to analyze a religion through the behavior of its adherents.
So what made you you said you converted to Islam 19 years ago, 17, 19?
Yeah, 19 years ago thereabouts.
So what made you realize that this is the truth? And I mean, well, you did explain it to me earlier, but I'm saying when were you convinced that this is it? This is for me? And why didn't you, like, because you said earlier that if you do what you're supposed to do, you're gonna be guaranteed to go to heaven. And I explained to you my the way I see it is, like I explained it to you earlier. It's like a lottery ticket. It's a game of luck. I've been inside a church. I've been inside just to learn. I've been. I even try to understand other religions as well. But what I'm saying, like the way I personally see it is like, okay, you're buying a $2 lottery ticket. You got millions of people playing this lottery for millions of dollars. Lucky numbers. Whoever wins. They get all the money.
Yeah, I mean,
This is also how I see religion itself as. So I'm
yeah,
saying, how are you convinced that, okay, this is the truth? I have to, you're absolutely convinced that this is it, and if you believe in it, you're gonna go to heaven. But we don't know where we're gonna end up. We don't know what exactly happens after we die. We don't know.
yeah. I mean,
So
lottery, I think, is just basically a bad strategy, if nothing else. What am I going to put my faith in or not? I don't know if you recognize that you always have an element of faith, regardless. There's so much to unpack here, because it's a beautiful question, but there was more than sort of 6 months plus of really intense debate that went deep into physics, maths, philosophy, history, all sorts of stuff. So it's difficult to sort of summarize one main thing. There's a few key turning points. One of the key turning points was when Kareem turned around and asked me why I applied double standard as a naturalist, and I was kind of shocked by that at first. But what was really deep in that was that to do any mathematics at all or any physics at all, you have to take some axiom, some starting point, and then with that starting point, you see how well it maps to reality that you observe, to things you observe, and so on. And if it all fits very well, then that increases the credibility of that axiom or that system of axioms. That's how all of math and physics works, without any exception. And then for some reason, when it came to matters of religion, refused to permit any axioms. And that was a severe double standard. So for me, I started to view the Shahada as being a one axiom unified theory of reality. And the question is it true? Does it even work? If it works, is it more elegant? Does it map to reality better? Is there any reason why it must be true? And therefore things that are not aligned with it are false, and so on, which is quite a big sort of investigation to go under. But this is what it ultimately came down to. And I think the other major turning point was this realization that I was atheist according to the Enlightenment redefinition of deity in the Enlightenment period, in the 1800s or so, more or less, where I'm pointing in the Enlightenment anyway. Deity got completely redefined and worship got completely redefined. They suddenly had this new meaning, but redefining something doesn't change its nature any more than calling a cat a dog turns it into a dog, right? So according to the standards of everyone before the Enlightenment, I was still a polytheist. I was a polytheist, not an atheist. It was only by Enlightenment's own standards that I could say I was an atheist. And from that, I realized that actually everyone is really, there's no such thing as atheists. Really, there's just polytheists and monotheists and many different kinds of polytheistic pantheon. And it can be very subtle. Some people take the market as one of their deities. Some people take their desires as one of their deities. Some people take themselves and their judgment as one of their deities. There's all sorts of ways in which you can be polytheist, and the sort of trick of the devil, if you like, in the modern Western view is pretending that they're not deities, that it's not polytheism, that devotion is not worship, but it is. So that was really the second major turning point, was realizing there is no such thing as a position where I have no deity whatsoever. And the clearer I got on things, I then sort of had to come and understand this concept, Allah, the God. What does it mean? And that involves things like Surah Al-Ikhlas, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Familiar with who?
Surah Al-Ikhlas.
Can you say that again?
Surah Al-Ikhlas.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
That's a surah from the Quran. I don't know the meaning, but I know what you're talking about.
So just briefly on the stream, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله هو الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
I don't know the meaning. I've heard this. I don't know the meaning. I'm aware.
You recognize the Arabic though?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. That's good. So the first line, قل هو الله أحد, you say he is the one, which is this definite article. And it's interesting because it means anyone who is monotheist or taking some monotheist perspective must be referring to the same thing, even if they have differences in their understanding or various, deficiencies in their understanding. But he is the one is an important sort of qualifier, and it's part of this, definite article. So therein right away is a very clear, logical, rational distinction of what's being said for me. And it sort of clarifies this concept of monotheism as being, pretty fundamental, or being the fundamental. And then the next is Allahu as-Samad. Now, as-Samad's a really interesting word that, to translate it into English, there's like tons of different approximate words, but none of them really capture the idea. And this is a really good example of why unless you're using the native concepts, things often don't add up. And to really things add up, you need to really get the native concept. So as-Samad relates to being independent. So he's the only one that is independent, and everyone and everything else is dependent upon him, but he's not dependent on anything else. But it also relates sort of by proxy to his being eternal and being self-sufficient. And the next line, lam yalid wa lam yulad, he neither begets nor is begotten. So, he didn't have a starting point where he was born from something. He just always was, and he never had a son or never had, anything born of him, because for something to give birth to something means something of the same type comes out, but there's only one God, so there's no thing as the same type of God. So that cuts off all those logical roots. And the last one, walam yakunnahu kufuwan ahad, and there is none other.
There is nothing comparable to him.
Exactly. Now this one's really fascinating, because for me, this last line was like a penny dropped. I went, wow, all of these arguments against generic theism that I've been growing up with and bashing people with and all this kind of stuff, really explicitly don't apply to Allah. You got it right there in line 4 of Surah Al-Ikhlas. As soon as you put Allah in a category with other ideas of deity, you've now committed a category error. It's a logical fallacy, because part of the definition of Allah is that there's none others like him. He doesn't fit in any other category. So you can't even do atheism, where A is supposed to be a logical negation of all theism. The best you can do is everything except Allah. But Allah has to be considered uniquely or separately, and to do anything other than that is to take on a straw man. So this is one of the reasons I had to take Islam particularly seriously, because for one thing, this thing of being independent or dependent really cut to the heart of what deity meant in the deepest sense. So this was really important clarification. And then the fact that essentially this 4 lines pretty much annihilated most of the positions against monotheism in one sort of elegant 4-line structure. That was really compelling for me. But still only the beginning of the journey. I had to understand the various names and attributes and how they hang together, because it wasn't until I got sort of this good working concept of Allah that I could see how it is this fundamental idea, fundamental concept from which everything else follows, and which must necessarily be there because of other stuff I don't know if we'll get into to do with logical necessity.
Okay, so I mean, I understand. You have your that's what you have your belief, and you're holding on to it very strong, because you've been practicing for many years. I mean, if that helps, that benefits you personally in your life, that's a good thing. There's a lot of things that people do to benefit them, whatever they practice or believe in. And,
No, yeah, I can appreciate that. Although it's interesting how do you measure benefit? What does that really mean? Because I certainly wasn't looking for something like it or looking for its benefits. And initially it didn't feel like a benefit. It felt like it was tearing my life to pieces, because it was. And it wasn't really until I'd settled into the new mode of being that I could really see its benefits. So it wasn't like doing it for the benefits, but having done it enough and seen and realized the benefits, I wouldn't want to leave it. But I don't think that's part of the grounds. For me is very distinct from the part of grounds of why I believe it. Like, I wouldn't believe something just because it's convenient or useful.
No, you believe it because you say you believe it's the truth. That's why you believe in it.
Yeah,
that's what somebody who's a Christian can say the same thing. I'm not a Christian, but that's something they will hold on to, that they believe that they need to that's what that's the truth. Or someone who's following Hinduism, not that I follow Hinduism, but they can follow they're gonna say that this is God, and this animal is a god, and it's gonna help them. They gonna practice their faith. It still
it's
falls into the
interesting you
same
raised
category,
those.
doesn't it?
No, for me, it's subtly different. Remember, I was raised initially in a Christian school, so that's actually what I was first exposed to. The there's really important differences for me, and they come down to what this word truth means and what truth really means. Now, one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-haq, the truth, which is the, so it's definite article, and it's objective, so it's a foundation of this objective truth. In other words, objective truth means God's eye view, and it's something that we are able to process and understand logically and are encouraged to do so. And that's something that is in Islam, which is not the case at all in Christianity. Christianity, it's quite the opposite. They say it's the Trinity and it is inherently a mystery. So you have to believe it's true while simultaneously not being able to use the normal rational faculties by which you examine whether or not something's true. Whereas in Islam, you're supposed to use the same normal rational faculties as you use for other things. So the notion of truth itself is properly preserved in Islam, but starts to, so somebody who's a Christian claiming it's true, well, they're claiming that Trinity is true as the true nature of God. They've got their work cut out for them, because the concept of truth doesn't even survive the contradiction of 3 and 1 particularly well, or at least it has to be watered down a lot. And in Hinduism, I go on the streams on Thursdays with Hashem and Mansoor.
Yeah, I find Hinduism confusing, but the only reason I was bringing it up because I'm saying that that's something they follow and they believe that's the truth. Although I do find
this is why I was going to pick
Hinduism
them up.
itself confusing.
Well, this is what I was going to pick up a lot of it. Is most of them don't seem to really believe it's true, or that anything is well defined to be true there. Like, if anything, even the hardliners will be saying the scripture is true, and then they'll qualify it with some kind of sense in which it's true, because in itself, things that are happening in this earth are Maya, which are a kind of illusions. So then they're saying what truth is illusion, or truth is breaking the illusion. So again, whichever ones you go to, actually, this concept of truth is at best watered down, and sometimes more mortally wounded in these other religions. So when they say, I believe it's true, they really mean something different from when I say in Islam, I believe Islam is true. Like I say, I believe it's true in the same sense of truth, or in an even more profound or greater sense of truth than the examples we use in physics to determine whether things are true there. I believe it's better proved with better logic and better observational empirical support than the electron. And the electron's considered one of the best proved things in physics. There's also some really interesting stuff to do with these articles of faith, or a priori beliefs people have. Like, technically, even my own existence when I was an atheist was an axiom, an article of faith that I had to take, because it explained things, it made sense of things. But if I take the Shahada, then even my existence follows from the Shahada and is no longer a separate article of faith. So again, with the Shahada, you have this maximal theoretical foundation, which is tightly integrated with this al-haq, the notion of truth. And from it, literally everything, all of the most foundational important concepts, no matter where I looked, followed and gelled beautifully. And that is the essence of having done my best to look for and follow the truth, whatever seems to be truth to the best of my ability. And I always felt like, I can't be knocked for doing better than that.
Let me ask you. So if you say, so since you're practicing your faith, you miss your prayers, or you end up eating pork, or you end up doing something that you're not supposed to do you then believe that you're going to end up in hell, or are you going to end up in heaven? Like,
no, for me, it doesn't quite work as directly as that. So for me, these would be sins that would accumulate on my scale. They'd be like bad deeds. Because remember, at the end of the day, we're going to have this judgment day where we get weighed, good deeds versus bad deeds and things. Now, there'll be various people who have wronged me in this life, and people that I've wronged. And there's this whole thing where, you know, I'll be running around essentially dumping my bad deeds on people who I have a right to because they've wronged me, and taking the good deeds that people have a right to because they've wronged me.
But you could also make things right. I mean, you can't do that, and you can't make things. So, say I stole money from you, right?
Mhm.
And I end up returning that money.
Yeah.
Isn't that making things right?
Yeah, I mean, it
And
might
be
not
like,
be
hey, I'm
completely.
sorry I took your money from you, and now I'm returning your money. So wouldn't that be
Yeah,
making things right?
well, maybe. I mean, here's an interesting example. So, like, let's say it's someone who's in Algeria or Morocco or somewhere where they don't have, like, you know, world-class health systems unless you can pay for your private care. And then you nick that money off them, and that just so happens to be the time when they need the money to treat their dying grandma, or their grandma who is now dying because they couldn't afford the high quality treatment. And then you return them the money afterwards and say, hey, I've made it all good. And they're like, yeah, but our grandma's now suffered and died because we didn't have the money when we needed it. In that case, you haven't really made it all good, right? There's nothing you can do about that. And you never really know what you're depriving someone of through that theft. Sometimes just the act of theft is nothing about the money. It's the fact they feel violated and unable to trust, and it ruins their life in different ways. So you be careful about thinking you know how to make good, basically. Everything's known to Allah. He knows how to make things good, but we don't, and we can make serious mistakes through underestimating stuff.
And I would just add here that Islam, we have the concept of forgiveness, that no matter your sin, while you're alive, turn around and seek forgiveness from Allah for doing that sin, and do not repeat that sin
So it's
intentionally.
kind of ironic you're saying that, but I'm looking at the screen. It says only dying with shirk is unforgivable. So that's
Yeah.
the unforgivable sin.
What did I just tell you? That while you're alive, right, seek forgiveness from Allah. For if you were performing shirk, right, like all of these uh, the new Muslims, right, they used to be, before they became a Muslim, what were they doing? They were performing some form of shirk. Okay,
No, I'm talking about as of
they
now, as of now. So if someone who's doing, because okay, so so let me just get this right. So you have a person. Let's just say you did shirk right now. You know, not like behind, off the camera. You just bowed your
Mhm.
head to a book, and this book is a god, and then you did that, and then you going to hell automatically. You just go to hell,
No,
and that's
the
how to.
Islam does not have it like that. Please,
Yeah.
this is what I was trying to
Or in your thoughts
make
that
you
you're
understand.
entertaining your thoughts and you're
Yeah.
worshiping
So
Christ and you're
again,
worshiping a cow.
my brother, let me explain this, and this would become clear to you. Allah says in Allah says this clearly about us, that we are uh, a creation of His that will commit sins, and if we stopped committing sins and seeking forgiveness from Allah, He would have wiped us out and replaced us with another creation that would have done so. So this is in our nature to sin, that we will inadvertently do certain sins in our lives. All right, unless Allah protects us from those sins.
So
Now,
basically, I did shirk
listen,
though.
listen, listen, listen,
Okay.
listen,
Yeah. Let me finish
listen.
it off. Yeah.
Before, my brother, just be patient. The answer is coming. So, in this life, no matter what sin you've committed, while you're alive, while you have a breath, you should be seeking forgiveness from Allah. And forgiveness in the Tawbah in Islam, it doesn't just mean that you're seeking forgiveness. You're actually means that you turn around, you leave that way of sin, and actually turn around and adopt a way which is pleasing to Allah. All right. So if you were doing shirk and you realize that no, there is only one God, right? Or you knew it and you were doing shirk and you realize that no, you have to please only God, the Almighty, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the creator of this reality, right? Then you're forgiven by God. And it's as if that sin was never committed. he can eliminate those sins as if those sins never ever existed.
Yeah, and to more directly address what you're saying, note the critical word dying, right? It's not saying that anyone who's ever committed shirk couldn't be forgiven. You know, I committed shirk before when I was atheist without even knowing. And then, you know, after I know, I'm sure I made some missteps. And there were times when I had some misunderstandings about Allah and may have accidentally committed shirk, but never intentionally. If you intentionally commit shirk, then yeah, there's got to be some really seriously deep disease of the heart to do that. If you believe and know a lot and then still commit shirk, but
So you would
again,
probably have to repent for that, right?
oh yeah, for sure. Whenever you become aware, you should have to repent for it. But this is the thing: it's crucially, it's to do with dying, right? While you're still alive, you can still turn for repentance from that sin. But after you've died, you no longer have that ability to turn away from it and to make repentance for it. So that's the sense in which it's unforgivable. Like you will pay the price of that. There is no you failed, you missed your last opportunity to ask for forgiveness for that. Whereas with other things, many other transgressions will be forgiven after you've died. But shirk is the
Right.
only exception to that. And this comes back to what I said before about, because if you don't properly respect and address Allah in the right way, you can't genuinely ask him for forgiveness. And if you can't genuinely ask for forgiveness, yet you are imperfect, then you can't have a place in a perfect afterlife.
Okay, so you know, it's like just so if you're committing shirk, you're worshiping more than one god, and after knowing that there's only one god, and you're worshiping multiple gods, and knowing that you shouldn't be doing that, and then you repent as long as you're alive, and then come back, and then you know, then it's all good. But if you die, it's not all good. Then you just go to hell. Is that's what you're
So,
saying, right?
so there's a difference between jahiliyyah and kufr. Jahiliyyah is when you do not know, when you don't have the truth, and you exist in that sense without knowing the truth, and you do whatever you're doing because you're not aware of the truth. At the same time, there is kufr. Kufr is when you know the truth, but you hide it from yourself or from the people because you love this worldly life too much. Maybe it's the money, maybe it's the wealth, the power, right? You want to hold on to all of these things because remember this, that all of these are also uh, the very things which human beings desire, which human beings want to hold on to, right? And religion itself, these thoughts, they give people power. When you start believing that somebody is a president, it's only then that person actually holds the power, right? If nobody believes that somebody is a president, no matter if they've won an election or not, if everybody stops believing in that person as a president, that person is just a meaningless, uh, random individual of the society. He holds no power, right? So belief is the most fundamental, powerful thing that people want to control to gain power.
Because it's fundamental to human dynamics.
Yeah,
I mean, if people stopped believing that dollars had value, then that would
exactly.
very strongly influence the dynamics of people pretty quick, right?
Yeah, people people believe that a particular company has bad results. The company stock prices start falling, even if that company is doing really well. If you've if you know of any market dynamics, you would realize this is to be true, and this is the reason why, brother, we're talking about this very thing, that what is it that you actually believe in? If you can identify those, this conversation will become a lot easier because
Well,
then we can analyze and ask you to explain to us why you ended up believing those things, right?
the reason is
By the way, brother, we're going to wrap up in 5 minutes. Okay, so we're not going to start any new conversation, but you're welcome to come back. Where
it's no problem. I'll come back again. It's
Yeah, I'd
no
love
problem at
love to
all.
have you back. But also, if you want to, there might be some elements of this stuff you'd be more comfortable discussing privately rather than on a live stream, and in which case, and certainly from my side, there's things that I would potentially share with you that I wouldn't share on a live stream. So if you want to take my email and set up sort of some other sort of channel to chat, we can do that.
Sure.
Do you want to leave him the
But
email address?
I'll head out. Been here for a while. Maybe next
Yeah.
time I'll come
Can you
on.
pop it up on the thing, Faisal? It's cogent.faith.
Okay. Oh no! I was saying in the back chat.
Oh no! I mean, if you just give cogent.faith at pm.me, or you can flash it up on the screen just so
Did you put it in there?
I can type it now.
The thing that's still back of my head that I'm holding on to, that's not easy for me to let go, is this lottery comparison that I still cannot let go of this for a long time. That
Yeah.
for many years that the religion itself, regardless, I have your email, but the religion itself is a game of luck. That if you do something in this lifetime, you're gonna win a prize in the next. If again,
I
regardless
think,
of faith, it's not
yeah.
just Islam. It's could be Christianity or anything. It's just a game of luck. That's how it's in my head right now.
But
I
then
get what you're saying. If I
That
could just
if I
respond to
do
this one,
something
Faisal.
wrong, I mess up. I could end up doing shirk. Even intentionally having like you have a desire to drink alcohol. You could be
Yeah.
Christian or Muslim. You could have a desire to eat pork,
Mhm.
and it's wrong. You're not supposed to eat pork, but you end up eating it because you have this desire, and you were mentioning earlier that this is an act of kufr, right? This is an act if you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to do it,
only if
but
you
you end
know
up
you're not
doing it.
supposed to do it. Yeah. But this is the thing. This is why I see where you're coming from with the lottery element, and I really tried to. I think I need a lot more time to go through. Maybe even bring up a little whiteboard to separate out this fundamental. What relates lottery is this idea of probability, right? There's rather than certainty, there's some probability, and that's what kind of connects this idea of lottery. But probability doesn't mean completely unknown and completely unknowable. It's about degrees of belief or degrees of certainty that you have. And so separating this idea of completely random, which is like the lottery like, to when the uncertainty is managed and influenced by what you can and can't know. This is really important. This is something we need to go, because I think it's a real fundamental problem to have the idea of it's just a lottery sort of being at your foundations. But it is also important to preserve the idea that we can know things without knowing our own destiny with certitude, that we need to be able to pull back from being overconfident and arrogant to the extent of hypocrisy to think that we know things that only God knows. So there is a sweet spot to find. But remember the analogy I gave of a trained pilot versus someone who just has no idea and it just happens to be at the controls. It just doesn't make sense to say they're both just a lottery, even if in both cases you cannot say for certain they'll land the plane. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but there's actually something even more fundamental here that I feel that you're not understanding. And at the most fundamental level, you don't believe in this. This is like I was saying to you, my brother, this is an excuse that you've come up with. It has no meaning for you when it comes to your life, because this lottery idea, when you apply it to it, right, when you apply it in real life, that means there's really no intention behind any action of any human being, of anything that happens. There is no intention, there is no, and there shouldn't be a
So
consequence if this everything is without intention. So if I right now decide that I'm going to torture you, right, you until I actually give up, right, and it doesn't matter what it is, why is there even a consequence of that torture then? Because this is just random, this is just lottery. You were just a number out of all these numbers. There is really
it
no
it's
there's
just the way.
really no meaning. There's really no meaning then to everything that happens. But you live your life as if there's a meaning behind it. If somebody hurts you, you wouldn't just say, oh, this is just a random consequence. If somebody comes and cut off your arms or legs, you're not going to just say, oh, that person, this was just a random lottery event, right? I just got unlucky, right? There shouldn't be any consequence for it.
The thing I mentioned, because it's like lottery, a game of luck. The reason I mentioned, and I said it earlier, is because we don't know
Look,
exactly
look, look.
what's going to happen
Again,
after we
again,
die and
again,
where we're going to end up
again,
at.
it doesn't matter. I'm asking you, do you think if I cut off your arms and legs and I torture you until you're screaming and until for days and months, do you think there should be a consequence for my actions?
There should be
Why?
a
Why?
form of
Under this
justice should be.
lottery, no, under this lot, justice doesn't make any sense in a lottery situation. Everything is random. Everything is, there is no consequence. In your worldview, there shouldn't be a consequence. So your whole life that you talked about, that you faced all these grievances against all those grievances that you have against certain people, they are of no consequence. So you don't live your life like that. You don't believe in this lottery, but you use this as an excuse. So this is what I meant earlier, that you need to get past this, because this is not what you believe in. You want consequences because you do not believe in the randomness of everything.
I think this is why we need better language to talk about the. So there's something, I don't know if you can have a look at some videos on YouTube after you go on something called Bayesian theory, or Bayesian probability, which is basically how you go from certainty being one and knowing for certain it's true being one, knowing for certain it's false being zero, to having all of these numbers in between that indicate some level of certainty or knowing something. And this should show how deeply related it is to probability. And I think this will help you to unearth why you're stuck in this lottery picture. Because again, if it was a lottery, then skill would make no difference, which would mean all the study of the religion and all the efforts to try and do better in it would make no difference.
Yeah.
And that's why lottery is a terrible analogy. And if you keep falling back on lottery, you won't be able to really make progress in it. Whereas if you look at the probability and uncertainty, and you think about things that are never certain, but you have you're damn well better off with a lot of training and expertise and insight and knowledge, then that's a much better analogy. I mean,
Listen,
even poker versus a lottery would be slightly better, because at least in poker there's a skill element, right? And so it's not completely random. It's not just like a lottery, and this skill element will help you to understand why there is a reason, there is value to having the truth of what the rule book is and what the assessment criterion are, and the truth of how to best navigate this dunya into the akhirah, inshallah.
I'm gonna look up that Bayes theorem. I know that you just mentioned.
Bayesian,
I'm
Put
not
it
an
in the back.
engineer in physics. I'm just let you know that I'm not an engineer, or like I'm not someone who's knowledge in physics. That's
This is
not
just
what
a
I
rational
majored in college.
concept.
But
Nothing
Yeah,
I'll
It's
still look
just a
it up.
rational concept. Yeah.
But before I go, I just want to say one more last thing: is that there's also a fear of praying 5 times and doing good, and there's a fear that okay, I'm doing all of these things, I'm still gonna end up in the wrong place if I end up doing a mistake. Now it's in my head now that I'm gonna end up doing this, and I'm gonna end up. This is what's gonna happen to me. I'm gonna end up doing something wrong. I might end up doing shirk, and I might end up dying. Oh,
yeah,
this is gonna happen
man.
now. If I die, I ended up doing shirk. I did not repent, and now I'm gonna go to hell. So you need to understand that there's also fear, or even if
Oh,
you're a Christian doing what you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to, there's always a fear you're gonna end up in hell.
yeah, for sure. It's interesting because, I mean, what you just described is an excellent. Like, I'm pretty sure various imams have described this as being exactly one of the ways the shaitan likes to mislead people. And so it takes something good and then twists it into something really bad. It's saying like, oh, well, initially it's like, right, I don't want to, I want to do my best to avoid ever touching the fire, let alone being,
Yeah.
forever, and then turn it into, well, you know, you can never be perfect, and so what's the point in doing it at all, and all this kind of stuff. This is really sort of classic. It's like you're telling me that
I'll
the
make an
shayateen
analogy.
have a.
Brother Islam, I'll
But
make
I'll
an
let you
analogy
guys
that would
go.
explain this.
Okay.
And just hear this out. If you fear dropping the glass of water when your mother asks you to, or your father asks you to, or somebody asks you to give them a glass of water, and you just fear that you will drop the water, or you drop the glass and break it and shatter it, and you do not give them for this reason, are you a rational person anymore? Do you consider yourself to be a rational human being anymore?
No.
So this is what you already have your answer, my friend. So think through the discussion. Hopefully it benefited you, right? Think through, take a look at it again, my friend. We do have to get going. All right.
All right. So I'll speak to you guys next time. But thank you for talking. You
All right.
guys have a good day. Take care.
Speak to you
You
soon,
too.
Sam. If you can come back with Sam next time so we can recognize you, because I still haven't seen your
Yeah.
face. So I might recognize your voice, but just call yourself Sam.
All right.
All right. Nice
Take
to meet
care.
you.
Okay.
I'll guide him.
We didn't plan for this to be 3 hours long.
We planned for
But
it to be
this
half that.
2 hours, and that's probably how long most of our streams are going to be. We will be doing 2 streams, hopefully. That's the goal. But let's see how it goes. Early morning. I'll put on a community post to just sort of understand from all of you how the time is working. We'll try and see if we can premiere this as well. And for the audiences in the West Coast, in the Western Hemisphere, who might have missed it, just so that they are able to benefit from it as well.
And please comment with your feedback if things were too technical, not technical enough. If you wanted more diagrams and explanations to bring to life what was being said.
Oh, I would love diagrams and explanations.
All right, so maybe we'll go in and do that.
Yeah.
I do feel like I have a whiteboard ready next time. We should make some time to do that. But you know, any particular topics that people think would help them to understand the discussion with William Lane Craig, or to clarify anything we're talking about with Sam afterwards, or so on.
Yeah.
Do drop in the comments.
And our next few streams, as you were talking, are going to be around William Lane Craig and why we feel that his arguments ultimately fall apart when he's trying to justify his own beliefs and not just the belief that God exists, right?
Yeah, Craig and Oppie. I think that they sort of take these two different sides, and they're really good examples.
Yes.
Definitely looking at William Lane Craig and his resurrection of the Kalam cosmological argument without apparently understanding Imam al-Ghazali's corrections to it, and why the Ghazali cosmological argument is far superior, which relates to modal collapse and all that sort of stuff. So,
all right, that's great. So, we're seeing you again on Thursday, Brother Sam.
On Thursday, I'll be on the Dawah Wise channel, inshallah.
Inshallah. All right. Okay. With this, I would say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Remember our brothers and sisters in Sudan, in Palestine, all around the world, who are going through challenges that we are not facing, and make dua for them. All right, brother. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.